Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting adventure. Today, Audio Novel presents Aemon Targaryen by Ghostwriter 0002. And if you're looking for more amazing stories, don't forget to check out my Patreon page. Your support helps turn incredible tales like this one into fully immersive audiobooks. Join me on this journey, and together, we can bring more stories to life. Thank you for being part of the adventure. Let's begin. Chapter 31 POV MC. Cousin, I said with a small warm smile, like a cousin happy to see his cousin whom he hadn't seen in so long. No more princess? Rhaenyra asked in an arrogant tone, like someone proud of having exposed a hypocrite. Which I am, I thought, keeping my small smile. Since you didn't call me Lord Royce, I thought we could skip the formalities, but I might be wrong. I apologize if that's the case. Stop that right now, Rhaenyra said, losing patience and revealing her true intentions. I stayed silent, still with my fake smile, which was slowly turning into a real one, amused by her childish and immature reactions, as well as by her subtle attempts at manipulation, which she barely mastered before trying to test them on me. Rhaenyra, you're not clever enough to destabilize me. You're not up to the task in this kind of little games, I thought, amused by her behavior. I know everything you're doing, and Daemon won't support you anymore once you've allied with the whore of Old Town. I haven't seen many whores in the castle since I arrived. They seem to be rather scarce, though not particularly discreet. Hearing the sound of steel being slightly drawn, I smiled at Ser Harwin Strong, who was advancing, draped in his golden cloak. The cloak my father gave him, which he now uses to assert his small authority. Dracarys, I thought softly. Erupts, who had landed in the largest courtyard of the Red Keep, formerly the home of Vermithor and Silverwing, suddenly stood up and roared before projecting flames directly at Rhaenyra and her party. POV Viserys Targaryen. Dragon roar. Aya. I turned around, hearing the piercing scream of Jessamine Redford and the angry roar of Erupts. What I saw completely froze me. I couldn't react or even speak to give an order to Aemon to regain control of his dragon. I raised my arms to shield myself from the heat of the flames that had nearly reached us, and I heard Aemon shouting instructions to his dragon in High Valyrian. Erupts, that's enough. As soon as the heat subsided, I rushed forward, thinking I would find the charred corpse of my daughter, but there was nothing. A few meters from her, everything had melted under Eryx's breath, even the stone, which deeply surprised me, as few dragons had a breath as powerful as his. Aemon. I shouted, furious, but what I didn't expect was the small, calm smile plastered on Aemon's face, who seemed to be joking with his dragon, lightly tapping its snout. Hearing my shout, he turned to me and said, "Sorry, Uncle Viserys. Eryx got a bit carried away, he can't stand it when I'm threatened with living steel. But I'm the son of the Hand of the King and wouldn't want to slay a prince of House Targaryen, just as I would never allow anything to happen to my dear cousin." I couldn't believe my ears. I felt like I was dreaming, that someone would tell me to wake up, but no. After I blinked, I was still there, in the same place, in the middle of a ruined courtyard, facing Aemon, who, with his characteristic smile, was threatening me without hesitation. He dares to threaten his king so openly because I have no dragon, because his fiancée, who will soon be his wife, rides the largest dragon there is, and because Daemon is his father, I thought. I didn't realize how dangerous he was back then, but now I understand the danger he poses to Rhaenyra. Another thing in his speech made me frown, and I turned to Harwin Strong, who was still in shock from his near-death experience, but who was trying to hide it as much as possible. Then, I focused my attention on Rhaenyra, who, although less panicked than the others, wasn't in a good state of mind. I said, "We'll discuss this another time. Since Eryx isn't able to control himself, have him locked up in the dragon pit." Just as I finished speaking, Eryx suddenly took off, and I frowned even more before sighing and rejoining the nobles, shocked by the scene that had just unfolded. For now, there's nothing I can do. I absolutely must speak to Daemon before his son becomes uncontrollable, I thought, regretting, for the first time in years, the death of Balerion. Chapter 32. POV MC. As I watched the king and his court leave quickly, followed by Rhaenyra, who was shocked by my attack on her in front of so many witnesses, it would be more accurate to say that, for everyone who is not a Targaryen, my dragon had gotten excited on his own. But we all knew it was my doing. Generally, dragons have special bonds with their dragon riders, bonds that can be strong or weak, allowing them to share certain emotions such as joy, sorrow, anger, and the pain of their rider. A sort of empathic ability unique to dragons and their riders, I thought. But thanks to my trick, my bond with Uryx was practically telepathic. I smiled when I saw the young Cregan Stark, who would become one of the most feared Starks in Westeros when the dance ends, and I felt a small satisfaction in having gained his admiration. As soon as father's death would place him on the throne of Winterfell, and I would do everything possible to rule through him. If my plan works, I will gain future control of a house capable of assembling between 10,000 and 20,000 soldiers for now in times of war. Name, Aemon Targaryen. Age, 15 years. Title, Prince of House Targaryen. Allegiances, House Arryn, Lady Jane Arryn, House Targaryen, King Viserys Targaryen. Familiar, Uryx. Attributes. Constitution, 98. Strength, 92. Endurance, 99. Dexterity, 97. Agility, 97. Speed, 92. Intelligence, 130. Willpower, 82. Charisma, 82. Perception, 81. Wisdom, 85. Unassigned points, 0. Passive skill. Unburnt LVL 3, your resistance to ordinary fire is 30%, and your dragon lineage is purified to 12%. Uryx. Physical, 22.156. Magic, 21,000. Attribute points, 0. All my stats had increased significantly because I made sure my men captured traitors while occasionally participating in hunts to earn points more easily without attracting attention to any potential bloodthirsty tendencies that would make everyone suspicious of me. Especially my dear father-in-law, who might try to renege on our agreement and give Lena's hand to someone else, I thought. Restraining myself hadn't been easy, but in hindsight, it was a good idea, otherwise, I might have turned into a mad, bloodthirsty killer in search of more and more power. However, Uryx was growing far too quickly, much more than I had thought possible, and it was because I had made a miscalculation. I hadn't accounted for the phenomenal amount of food a dragon of this size would require. The more he grew, the more he killed, and the more points he accumulated, which I used to enhance his physique. It was a sort of virtuous and vicious cycle at the same time because I didn't want to keep making him grow indefinitely, but it was also a good thing because it allowed me and others to witness the second coming of Balerion the Black Dread. According to my estimates, if he continues to eat 3 cows a day plus 20 sheep and 40 goats, in 5 years, he will have surpassed Balerion and will be the same size as the cannibal. At least, that's what I imagine because I've never been tempted to approach his lair. I knew he was a formidable dragon, an expert in hunting his kin, and I didn't want to take my chances before I was sure that Uryx and I could defend ourselves properly. Come on, follow me, Cregan. We need to see if my mother has arrived, I said, forcibly pushing away the distracting thoughts that kept invading my mind. Yes, my prince, he said, following closely behind me. POV Rhaenyra Targaryen. Did you see that? He ordered his dragon to kill us, and right in front of the king. He should have been executed on the spot, asked Jessamine, still in shock. Like all of us, actually, I thought, observing Harwin for a moment. It was the first time he had faced a dragon's flame, and many brave men would have relieved themselves in the face of such an imminent experience. I restrained myself from rolling my eyes at Jessamine's stupid remark and continued to think on my own, under the anxious gaze of Harwin, my rock. He wouldn't have dared, I said, coming to the conclusion that if he was indeed behind Uryx's attack and it wasn't just an accident caused by Harwin's aggression, he wouldn't have dared to go all the way. I agree, said Jane, calmer than Jessamine, also reflecting on the situation. Harwin frowned and said, if he uses his dragon once, he can do it again and again. No, dragons are means of killing only in times of war. Once we enter a long period of peace, they become our partners as well as deterrent forces, I said, repeating what my father had told me once when I was younger. I completely agree with you, but Ser Harwin isn't wrong, now that he's used it once with impunity. If he did it, I said, because I knew that even though we had a strong bond with dragons, they weren't controlled by the Targaryens through some sort of mind control magic. He did it, said Jane categorically before adding softly, believe me when I tell you that he did it. Chapter 33. POV Rhaenyra Targaryen. You're not a dragon rider, you can't understand what I'm trying to explain to you. Dragons can't be controlled by thought. We are bonded, but not to that extent, I said. Eamon can, said Jane, still as confident as ever. I frowned, skeptical, and Jane continued her story. I know because I saw him do it when we were young. Back then, we were on good terms. His grandfather would often tell me stories about his grandson, the dragon rider of Uruks, the future greatest dragon in the known world, and maybe even in history. He told me that Eamon could give orders to his dragon without speaking, and under his grandfather's insistence, whom he didn't like to upset, he showed me once. It was a long time ago, but I could never forget that scene. The orders Eamon gave to his dragon by thought could range from retrieving a fruit from a tree to killing sheep, and in any way he wanted. At the time, I wasn't impressed, just horrified by the power it represented and eager to control Eamon, but dragons are not slaves, I said a bit harshly before realizing that I had just defended my cousin without even meaning to. I can understand why Eamon hates her, I thought, before brushing away all unnecessary thoughts from my mind to focus on what was most important. Eamon came to the capital with the intention of overthrowing you, I said, giving Jane what I believe to be the reason for this incident. Is this information reliable? Harwin told me, I said, looking at him. He nodded and immediately added, it is, I guarantee it with my life. I imagine it was the clubfoot who gave you this revelation, said Jessamine, gradually recovering her composure, clearly displeased with Harwin's brother. Harwin didn't even respond, and we remained in heavy silence for a few moments before Jane said, this cannot happen, we need to put him in his place, and without delay. How? I asked, eager to know Jane's plan. I think we could speak with the Valyrians, she said. Faced with my discouraged and incredulous expression, she didn't waver and added. They are supposed to arrive just before tonight's banquet. If we manage to intercept them and talk with them for a few moments, we could try to convince them that we are on the same side and that it's in their best interest to help us reign in Eamon. Princess Rhaenys might be sympathetic to our situation, given that she has experienced something similar, added Jessamine. Skeptical about the feasibility of this plan, I said softly in a bitter tone. I doubt it. She hasn't shown much enthusiasm towards me during our previous exchanges. I think she never will, given that she was supplanted by my own father. But we have nothing to lose, because if Eamon manages to depose you, very likely invoking the precedent of the Great Council, which the Lords of the Realm, all male, will immediately validate with the support of the Hightowers, I will be next on the list. At that point, we will have lost everything, the Vale, the Iron Throne. In short, we will have lost absolutely everything. POV Daemon Targaryen. I smiled, accompanied by my 6-year-old son, when I saw my eldest arrive, and I said, I hope everything went well for you. Perfectly well, if you don't count the fact that Uruks almost devoured Rhaenyra's new little pet, he said in a cheerful tone, accompanied by a little boy the same age as Balon, who looked at his brother with stars in his eyes. They are not cut from the same cloth, and it's not for lack of trying to forge him. Women, I said jokingly, while receiving a nudge in the ribs from my young and beautiful wife. POV MC. Need I remind you that I'm here, said a woman I immediately identified as my new stepmother, Rhaenyra Valaros. I imagine this Valyrian beauty is my new stepmother, I said, looking at the lady in question. You're a flatterer, said Rhaenyra. It's only flattery when I lie to please, but I always strive to tell the truth, especially to beautiful ladies, I said, bringing her hand to my lips. My new stepmother rolled her eyes, and Daemon smiled without taking offense, saying, That's not how you're going to charm her. I had to try, I said jokingly. These past years have helped to somewhat mend what was broken, but the core issue remains, he wants the throne, and he's counting on me to obtain it. Mother wanted me to convey her most sincere thanks for making one of her dreams come true, Rhaenyra said to me with a warm smile. Daemon frowned for a moment at the mention of Sarah, a person he has, for reasons I don't know, always loathed, even at the mere mention of her name. Don't be grumpy, Daemon, and Balon, stop hiding behind your father. You've been waiting a week to see your brother again. See again, as if we really saw each other last time, I thought, feeling slightly guilty because I had immediately seen this child as a possible future enemy instead of what he really was and what I represented to him, his big brother. Shy, he stepped forward slowly and extended his hand to me. I smiled at this gesture and knelt down to his level, saying, I've heard that you managed to bond with Sheep Stealer. That's a great achievement for your age. I'm proud of you, little brother. His smile instantly widened, and I took him in my arms before saying, "I don't yet know what gift I can give you, so forgive me, but I will find something soon." He nodded in my arms before I let go and ran my hand through his black curls. He looks like his mother, I thought, remembering one of the rare times I had glimpsed her at court during my childhood. Chapter 34. POV Rhaenys Targaryen. Have you heard the news? I asked my children, who were looking at Corlys and me. I could sense their slight anxiety because, starting today, their carefree lives would come to an end, and they would have to ensure the peace and prosperity of their own new households. Lena nodded, as did her brother, and I said, "Don't be fooled by appearances, but use your head in all circumstances, because starting tomorrow, you will be thrown into the lion's den, and from my few conversations with Eamon, I can assure you that he is far from the calm image everyone attributes to him. He's a true dragon, certainly dormant, but always ready to fight," I added. Corlys nodded and said, "Your mother is absolutely right, but we didn't get this far by wagging our tails like good little dogs. We are Valyrians from birth until the day we die, and we will take what is rightfully ours. Never forget that." I frowned, noticing that he was looking at Lena more intensely than at Rhaenyra, even though she had always done her duty, unlike my son who, despite all my love for him, constantly gave rise to worries in my mind. Corlys continued and said, "Remember that you must absolutely give birth to the next generation of dragon riders as soon as possible. With the high towers in power and the domestication of Bond," I interrupted him. He glanced at me briefly before continuing. "And the bond between Dreamfire and Sunfire with Prince Aegon and Princess Helena, we must maintain the numerical advantage. If Prince Aemon manages to become the rider of Silverwing or Vermithor, we will lose the hegemony we currently hold." Both nodded, and just as Corlys was about to add one last thing, the door was knocked on by Vaemond, who said from behind the door, "Princess Rhaenyra requests an audience with you, uncle." Corlys frowned, probably pondering the reason for our future daughter-in-law's sudden visit, then finally said, "Let her in." To my surprise, when my cousin's heir entered, she was accompanied by her maternal cousin, Jane Arryn, and her champion, who was also the heir to Viserys' hand and commander of the Gold Cloaks. "Princess," I said, standing up, as did the other members of my family. Rhaenyra nodded and then said, "Such formalities are unnecessary and redundant, especially among family members." Corlys smiled and said, sitting down immediately, "I quite agree." We all sat down, and to my surprise, Corlys did not invite the servants to bring extra chairs for the princess and her party to sit with us. "What are you doing, Corlys?" As Rhaenyra was about to speak, Corlys said in a loud, falsely cheerful tone, "Why have you come here, princess? You should be getting ready for your wedding." The princess's smile quickly faded before she forced herself to smile again and then said, "Since you're curious about the reason for my visit, I'll spare you the pleasantries and get straight to the point. Eamon must be reined in quickly, or we will lose a great deal." "We?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. It was not Rhaenyra who spoke, but her cousin Jane, who said, "All of us." "Does she speak for you?" Corlys asked, trying to unsettle Rhaenyra. "She has my full confidence," the princess calmly replied, her hypocritical demeanor gone. Well answered, while avoiding directly responding to the question to not appear weak without offending her cousin. "She doesn't know how to hide her emotions, everything is written on her face. She's afraid of losing her throne to Eman." I silently sympathized with her before refocusing on the ongoing discussion. "Eamon tried to intimidate us. From what I've learned, his dragon got agitated because one of your followers had the audacity to brandish steel in front of a prince who is also a dragon lord," I said, looking at Rhaenyra. "Ser Harwin was wrong, but he didn't fully draw his sword. He was just being a bit too protective. And Eamon's dragon did the same. You know perfectly well our dragons would do anything to protect us, we are bonded," I said. "It's different," said the Warden of the Vale. "How is it different?" Corlys asked in a tone of feigned interest. "He knows something I don't." I frowned and listened to Jane Arryn recount the alleged talents Eamon possessed, and it was only by observing Corlys that I realized that not only did he know what Eamon was capable of, but he also wanted to conceal this knowledge even from me. With all these clues, I came to understand that either Corlys had a plan in mind, lying to everyone to achieve his goal of seeing his blood on the Iron Throne by using Eamon and Rhaenyra to carry out his plan, or that he still had his spies placed within House Royce. Or maybe even both. Chapter 35. POV Viserys Targaryen. You seem tense, my love, my wife said as I looked at myself in the mirror. The years were taking their toll on me more and more, and I lost a bit more vigor each year since Emma's death. I'm worried, I said. Worried about what? Alicent replied, catching my gaze in the mirror. I lowered my eyes and added, about the future of my house, my succession, Rhaenyra's future, so many things. Alicent pulled away from me, and realizing I had made a mistake, I quickly turned around and said, I also care about our children, but Rhaenyra is so reckless that it haunts me day and night. I'm afraid she'll clash with her cousin. Alicent took my hands and said, what happened in the courtyard was an accident that Aemon handled quite well, if you ask me. He could have demanded Ser Harwin's head for that disrespect. And I should have demanded his head and that of his dragon for what he dared to do, accident or not, I said, clenching my fist. But you can't do that, Alicent said. I can't do that because I don't have the strength, and Daemon would never forgive me. The relationship he has with his son is special, but nonetheless indestructible, it's his greatest pride, I said. As his older brother, I knew Daemon well enough to understand that Aemon was his favorite and that it wasn't going to change. Soon, you will be able to, Alicent said, placing my hand on her already well-rounded belly. I smiled, and she added, we already have 3 children, with this 4th, we will have the advantage in the number of dragon riders. Aemon will have his own children too, I said, not reassured in the least by my dear wife's reasoning. Just like Rhaenyra, Alicent added. You'd be willing to work together with her? I said, surprised, as I was aware of the simmering tensions between her and Rhaenyra. I'll be ready to do whatever my king orders, Alicent said, gazing into my eyes with her beautiful hazel eyes. I love you, I said, placing my hands on her cheeks before kissing her gently. POV Lena Veerion. Annoyed by the task my father had given me, I went to my future husband's quarters. In front of the door, Ser Arnold Arryn and Ser Gunther Royce stood guard. Ser, I said in greeting. Both lowered their heads, and Ser Gunther opened the door, announcing loudly. Lady Lena Veerion is here, my prince. Let her in, Eamon replied. I walked past the 2 knights before coming face to face with Eamon, who, shirtless, was trying on different outfits in front of a mirror. You still haven't chosen what to wear for the feast. Lena, he said, turning around before quickly putting on a random outfit while adding. I thought the ceremony would be on the first day, so no, I didn't plan for the rest. I rolled my eyes and then said, I'm here on behalf of my father, so let's keep this as simple as possible. He nodded while continuing to get ready. Until the end of your stay in the capital, House Veerion would greatly appreciate it if you didn't interfere with the good mood of the princess heiress. I don't understand, Eamon said calmly, without looking at me. You understand perfectly what I'm trying to say, I said, convinced he understood but was trying to regain control to negotiate. He took several seconds before finally turning around, fully dressed, and said with a big smile. You're right, I'm a terrible liar, but I'm not inclined to obey your snake of a father. You know my father is proud, and if you don't do what he asks, he'll make you pay sooner or later, I said, raising an eyebrow at Eamon. Eamon nodded and said. I understood the message well, and you can tell your father that I'm neither at his service nor yours, and if you don't want to marry or he wants to marry you to someone else, he's free to do so. The polite smile I always wore froze. Then, as he walked past me, he looked me over before finally saying, You truly are blessed with a ravishing beauty. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a banquet to attend. Chapter 36. POV 3e. It is with great pleasure that His Majesty King Viserys welcomes you to these festivities to begin the celebration of the princely weddings, cried the herald in charge of announcements at the welcome banquet. Little by little, the hall began to fill, and all the minor lords and illustrious knights of the realm invited to participate in the tournament entered. This wave of people entering the hall stopped once all the representatives of the smaller houses had entered, and the herald resumed his role, announcing the first great house. The House Lannister and its lord, Jason Lannister, Lord Paramount of the West and Lord of Casterly Rock. The House Hightower and its lord, Ormond Hightower, Beacon of the South, Protector of the Citadel, Voice of Old Town, and Lord of the High Tower. The House Arryn and its Lady Jane Arryn, Lady Paramount of the Vale and Lady of the Eyrie. One by one, all the members of these houses, along with their close entourages, entered the banquet hall under the envious eyes of all the minor lords. Then it was the turn of the main players in this event. Prince Daemon, rider of Caraxes, defender of the narrow sea, governor of the Stepstones, and prince of Bloodstone. The music stopped, and everyone fell silent, watching the prince enter accompanied by his son, the black-haired Targaryen, along with his wife Rhaenyra Targaryen, daughter of Triarch Rhaenyra Valaros, and Princess Sarah Targaryen. The king applauded the entrance of his brother, with whom he shared a special bond, and everyone followed suit, celebrating the return of the rogue prince to the capital. Daemon took his place at the main table, to the left of Queen Alicent, who gave him a polite smile, which he returned before turning away from her and focusing all his attention on the door, where his son, Prince Aemon, could already be seen. The herald wasted no time and shouted, "House Royce and its lord, Prince Aemon Targaryen, rider of Uryx, the Bronze Dragon, Lord of House Royce, and Lord of Runestone." POVMC. As I entered the throne room, which had been decorated and rearranged to accommodate all the guests for these festivities, I smiled because, at just 15 years old, I had already outmaneuvered all the players in the Game of Thrones. But this is not the end, it's just the beginning, I thought, forcing my inflated ego, which was soaring due to the applause and all the respectful and envious looks from the lords, whether great or small, to come back down to earth. I separated from my mother, Gerald, Gunther, and William once we reached the head table to go sit next to my father, who had saved a seat beside him. I did not disappoint him and took my seat to his left, which he appreciated by giving a characteristic sly smile to my mother, who simply raised her glass in his direction. "Children," I thought as I watched the Valyrians enter under the herald's shouts and the disproportionate applause from the other lords. Lord Corlys of House Veerion, Lord of the Tides, Master of Driftmark, and his wife, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, rider of Malaise, their daughter Lena Veerion, rider of Vhagar, future princess and lady of Runestone, along with their son and heir Lena Veerion, rider of Seasmoke, future king consort, said the herald. I held back a laugh upon hearing the term, future king consort, because he still had to survive his cruel wife before even thinking about wearing a crown. Everyone stood up, including the king, and just as I was about to do the same, I felt my father's hand on my arm. I raised an eyebrow, and he said with a small smile in High Valyrian, "We're not going to stand for our inferiors, are we?" I said nothing but obeyed and remained seated. Turning my head, I saw that Rhaenyra was also seated, as was Balon. The conflicts between him and Corlys are still ongoing, I thought, understanding that Daemon might not be on good terms with Corlys since the end of the Stepstones War. This grudge must surely date back to the moment he realized he was just a means for Corlys to weaken Viserys' position to place his blood on the Iron Throne. As the Valyrians advanced under the applause of everyone, I met the eyes of all, particularly those of Rhaenys and Corlys, who both scrutinized me, clearly displeased for some reason. Perhaps because of my refusal to obey his instructions like a good little dog, which jeopardizes Rhaenyra's claim to the throne. Rhaenyra stepped forward and extended a hand to Rhaenyra, who kissed it, while Lena stared at me, likely waiting for me to do the same, but I didn't move, a not-so-subtle way of sending the following message. I serve no one but myself. Seeing that I wasn't going to bother standing, the Valyrians took their places beside us at the head table in silence, while the lords all applauded the display of affection between the two madly in love betrothed. The king stood up and said, "We are gathered for this celebration, and tonight we honor the oldest and most powerful ally of House Targaryen, an alliance dating back to the days of old Valyria and the times of dragons. United together, I am convinced that the houses Veerion and Targaryen will usher in a new era of dragons and unparalleled prosperity." Everyone applauded the king, and once the applause subsided, he said, "There will be 7 days of tournaments and banquets, after which the princely weddings will unite my daughter Rhaenyra, Princess of the Iron Throne, with Ser Rhaenyra Veerion, and Prince Aemon Targaryen with Lady Lena Veerion. Let the games begin," I thought, raising my glass in the direction of Jane Eyre. Chapter 37. The next day. 24th day of the 10th moon, year 114 AC. POVMC. Whoa! I screamed, holding tightly onto Uryx's saddle as we performed all kinds of acrobatics in the air. This is practically high-flying at this point, I thought to myself before mentally ordering Uryx to begin a descent into the courtyard of the Red Keep. "Did you have fun?" asked my uncle Gunther, looking really angry. I rolled my eyes and said, "I've done worse, and you know that perfectly well. But you've had much calmer dragon rides before." I shrugged without saying anything, a smile on my lips, and as he followed me, my uncle added, It seems your fiancé's request really upset you for you to blow off steam in this way. I smiled because it was something that, as a Targaryen, I could never share, and they could never understand the freedom and the rush of adrenaline I feel when taking risks as Urex and I perform acrobatics in the air. I rolled my eyes, and before I could say anything, I bumped into my famous fiancé. Without looking at my uncle, who was one step behind me, I said, "Speak of the devil." He stifled a laugh and followed as I greeted my fiancé. "Lena," I said in a neutral tone, hoping to avoid any awkward situations. "Oh, today I get a Lena," she said, pretending to be surprised that I was speaking to her. I was angry, I said, hoping she would quickly overlook my previous behavior. "And you're not anymore?" she asked, determined to twist the knife to get her revenge. "No, I realized it was childish and immature to be mad at you because your parents decided something beyond your control," I said. She looked at me suspiciously and asked, "Do you really mean that?" "No." "Of course," I said, placing a hand on her cheek. "So you'll obey my father?" she asked, giving me a sweet look, accentuating her gaze to gently force me to obey her father. I struggled not to reveal my true thoughts through my expression and nodded while adding, "I'll obey your father and not jeopardize our alliance, only and only if Rhaenyra doesn't bring up topics that would force me to destroy her in public." "You're talking about the crown princess?" "I'm talking about a cousin who thinks she's the queen, which she's not." "Not yet," Lena said, trying to correct me. I smiled and added, "Your mother knows better than you or even me that legitimacy alone doesn't make a king, let alone a queen." "She has 2 dragons," Lena said, defending Rhaenyra. "We also have 2, and not small dragons under 100 feet long," I said, rolling my eyes. Lena gave me a stern look and said, "You're talking about going to war with my brother." Understanding her situation, I tried to soften my tone by saying, "A war between dragons would be a terrible thing and is by no means my wish, but I won't stop fighting for my interests and those of my house. I was born Veerion, I will always obey my parents," she said stubbornly. "Then remain a Veerion and marry one of your cousins," I said, irritated by her attitude as I walked past her. I was really trying to make things work with Lena, but I wasn't going to let myself be domesticated and trained by her father through her. Maybe she thinks that because of my young age, I'll be more easily influenced, but she's completely mistaken. POV Lena Veerion. I narrowed my eyes as I watched him walk past me, even more irritated as I noticed a slight mocking smile on his uncle's face, the bronze giant. I was annoyed because, although my father's request required him to swallow his pride for a few days, it wasn't that humiliating. Once we're married, he can do what he wants. He could be smart instead of just thinking with his ego, I thought. "You won't get him this way," my mother said, surprising me. "How can I make him understand that not listening to father could truly create a rift between my husband and me? He knows exactly what the risks are, and he doesn't care. He's a young prince, lord of an important house, and on top of that, he has a dragon that would scare more than one dragon rider. I bonded with Vhagar, but I still obey my father. I didn't start doing whatever I wanted," I said. "You might not realize it yet, but you're not like all the young ladies of the realm. No young lady in this kingdom would have dared confront or even threaten her fiancé in this way, especially not if it were Eamon," said my mother, placing a hand on my cheek. I rolled my eyes and said, "So, what should I do?" "Let him. If he wants to ruin our alliance to gain control of the Vale, let him. It's no longer in our hands. You'll only annoy him by bringing it up again and again. Sometimes the best thing to do is simply nothing and patiently wait for the problem to resolve itself," my mother said with a slight smile. I frowned and said, "I just don't want him to ruin our engagement over a simple matter of pride." Mother laughed and said, "A man's pride is never simple. Sometimes, a man's pride is all he has left. Few are willing to give it up, even for all the gold in the world." "That doesn't reassure me," I said. "I'm not here to do that, just to tell you the truth and take you to get ready for the first day of the tournament," she said. Chapter 38. POV MC. From the royal box, I watched Criston Cole spur his horse and effortlessly knock down one of my knights. I frowned when he made his way to the box and bowed before the queen, realizing that Alicent was trying to show her goodwill to Rhaenyra through her champion. I turned my gaze away from Ser Criston Cole to look at his mistress, who gave me a brief glance before refocusing on the joust. I would have done the same if I hadn't heard that annoying voice of Jessamine. The Knights of the Vale are generally more enduring. It seems House Royce prioritizes quantity over quality in its knights. I smiled softly without responding because that bitch was far beneath me. Just because she shared Jane's bed didn't mean she could rise to my level. Arnold wanted to retort, but I raised my hand to stop him from playing into Jessamyn's game. I was all alone against the high nobility for now, and I had to be very careful with my next moves, or I could quickly find myself isolated by Rhaenyra and the Valyrians if they realized that I still intended to depose Jane. Everyone present in the royal box looked at us, waiting for a reaction from me, but quickly lost interest, disappointed by my lack of response. I gestured to Gunther to approach, and I whispered in his ear the plan I was going to implement to give Jessamyn a taste of her own medicine. She had been far too outspoken ever since she had developed a sort of friendship with Rhaenyra through Jane. Once I finished giving him my instructions, Gunther raised his eyebrows at me, tacitly asking if I was sure of myself, and I slowly blinked twice to indicate that I agreed and had fully considered the consequences that might fall upon us. POV Gunther Royce. After Eamon told me his plan to counter the Redforts and the growing influence they had in the Vale, I couldn't help but think that he wasn't doing it just to restrict the Redfort's growth but mainly to get revenge on that annoying Jessamyn Redfort. Whatever happens, it doesn't matter. We're going to have to start hostilities, and she just gave us the perfect excuse to begin the war, I thought, giving a hard shoulder to Lord Creighton Redfort's heir, Jasper Redfort, who was chatting with some friends. Watch where you're going, damn Redfort, I said, casting him a look that slightly frightened him, still unsettled and confused after the shoulder hit. Watch your tongue, sir. We are not at Runestone. I raised my eyebrows, stopping and turning back to the little shrimp who had the nerve to answer me, and I said, this isn't the Eyrie either. If your sister is ever caught in bed with the usurper, she'll be executed like the sinner she is. Take that back right now, or I'll be forced to challenge you to a duel to defend my sister's honor. I smiled slightly, contemptuously, and said, words. You've never fought. You wouldn't even be able to draw your sword if I showed you how. Say that again, Jasper said, placing a hand on his sword. That's enough, said the heir of House Corbray, pulling his friend closer to stop him from making a mistake. He calmed down and walked away from me, pushed by his friend who had seen through my plan, but I didn't stop there, for I said, pathetic. No wonder your sister has to prostitute herself so your house can prosper. Everyone who had been watching our exchange fell silent, and the two who were leaving froze. Come on, do it, I thought, discreetly placing a hand on a dagger hidden behind me. The Redfort heir quickly drew his sword and charged at me. Although I was surprised by his speed, I already knew he was going to do it. Southwest, when he got close enough, I had already dodged the sword strike, guided by anger, and plunged my dagger into his throat. Your sister should have kept her tongue in her mouth, in more ways than one, I whispered in Jasper Redfort's ear, as he stared at me wide-eyed, shocked as he felt his life slipping away. When I pulled my blade from his throat, I heard a loud scream, and as I prepared to stab the heir of House Corbray, he threw himself onto the body of his friend, who was bleeding out and convulsing. He's smarter than that fool, I thought, wiping my dagger while looking at Ser Harwin with a small smile. Is there a problem, Commander? I asked, seeing that he continued to stare at me as his men arrived, just like mine, who already had their hands on their sword hilts. What happened here? A fool who tried to. Murderer. Arrest him. He just killed the heir of House Redfort in front of a crowd of witnesses. What are you waiting for? Ser Harwin hesitated, and I said to quickly settle the matter, this man provoked me to a duel and attacked me dishonorably. Everyone here can testify, including the heir of House Corbray, unless he chooses to lie to the king. You provoked him just so you could kill him, said Leowyn Corbray. Did you hear that? I asked the commander of the Gold Cloaks, who was blocking my way. He grimaced slightly before stepping aside, and I returned to the royal box without bothering to change. As I resumed my place behind Eamon, everyone noticed the blood now staining my bronze cloak and armor, but no one said a word. Eamon turned to me and wordlessly asked if I had completed my task, and when I nodded, he gave a slight smile in the direction of the two ladies of the Vale sitting near the princess before settling back into a more comfortable position. The war has begun, I thought. Chapter 39. POV Viserys Targaryen. As soon as Gunther Royce returned to the royal box, I sensed that something bad was brewing, for judging by his cloak, someone had either died or been gravely injured. And judging by the satisfied look on Eamon's face, he surely knows who it is, I thought. A few minutes passed without anything ruining my tournament, and just as I was about to relax, letting my concerns fade into the back of my overly cautious mind, Rhaenyra gasped in shock while clutching her friend Jessamine Redford, who was in tears. "What's wrong with you, Eamon?" Rhaenyra shouted, rising from her seat, furious. Eamon said nothing and continued watching the joust as if he hadn't heard Rhaenyra addressing him. This is a blatant show of disrespect to the crown, and especially to me, I thought, feeling a deep sense of irritation toward my nephew. "The Princess Rhaenyra asked you a question," said my hand in an authoritative tone. Eamon smiled and turned toward us, placing a hand under his chin, and said, "I didn't hear any question from my cousin unless the angry little girl's scream I just heard was made by our dear delight of the realm. He's openly mocking us. This has to stop," I told myself, gripping the edges of my throne tightly. "You had Jessamine's brother assassinated simply for an innocent remark?" Rhaenyra screamed, outraged. "Jessamine? I wasn't aware that you were so close to Jane's handmaiden," Eamon said, lightly sidestepping the remark. "Young Redford is well known in the Vale for her talents." "It seems the court has had the chance to sample them," said Arnold Arryn, standing behind Eamon with a mocking grin. "Watch your tongue, Arnold. You're speaking to my cousin." "Such matters are part of the princess's private life," Eamon said in an authoritative tone to his knight, who lowered his head, not the least bit bothered by his master's public reprimand. And how could he be? Eamon just saved him from immediate execution. I turned my head as I heard the nobles begin to whisper about Rhaenyra's affairs. In just a few sentences, this demon had turned the situation against Rhaenyra, and everyone had forgotten about the dead heir of House Redford in favor of a scandal that could cost Rhaenyra the throne. As if it wasn't enough that rumors about Lena Valerion's preferences appeared as if by magic, now Eamon is trying to mislead the court about Rhaenyra's inclinations, I thought, watching Rhaenyra, whose face was red with shame as some of the ladies behind their fans laughed at her. I could even hear some of the men saying, "That's why she was so determined not to marry." "Eamon, your king orders you to provide an explanation that satisfies me, or I will be forced to punish you." Eamon smiled slightly, not taking me seriously, and just when I thought I would have to use force, he said, "You all accuse me of participating in this so-called murder, but I haven't left the royal box. You are the first witness of that. Your Majesty." "He's not wrong. Gunther Royce killed him. Ser Harwin can testify to that, he saw it with his own eyes." "Ser Harwin, your champion. What an irrefutable piece of evidence," Eamon said mockingly. "Eamon," Daemon said seriously, silently ordering his son to behave. Eamon straightened up and said, "Whether Gunther really killed that little Redford runt or not has nothing to do with me. He's your knight, you're responsible for his actions," Rhaenyra said loudly enough for all to hear. Many nodded in agreement with her, but Eamon, as usual, showed no sign of panic and calmly replied, "Responsible, maybe, but not the one giving orders for all his actions. Gunther swore loyalty to me, but he's not my slave. Those are two entirely different things, unless, of course, that's how you see your subjects, dear cousin. Do you think we're your slaves, bound to obey your every whim?" Rhaenyra, cornered, looked at all the people expecting answers from her without knowing what to say, so I intervened and said, "Don't change the subject." Eamon raised his arms and said, "Ask your questions to the person involved. Don't drag me into these pathetic attempts by a spoiled child to get her father's attention. My uncle, you know perfectly well that if I had wanted someone dead, I wouldn't have done it in such a way, it's amateurish." I locked eyes with Daemon, and silently, we came to an agreement in a matter of seconds. He's still on my side, but he won't abandon his son. "Ser Gunther, what do you have to say?" "Nothing more than what I've already told your city watch commander, who rendered justice in your name at the time," Gunther Royce said calmly. Surprised, I turned to Ser Harwin, as did Rhaenyra, who stared at her champion, astonished, and the next words that came out of my hand's heir's mouth made me want to slap Rhaenyra more than ever before. "Forgive me, princess, but what I was trying to tell you is that Ser Gunther simply defended himself after Jasper Redford attacked him suddenly, trying to restore his sister's honor. A sneak attack, then, I thought, understanding that Harwin was trying to spare the grieving Redford girl." Eamon turned to Jessamine Redford, still in tears, and said, "The knights of my house may not all be fine swordsmen capable of winning every tournament, but at least they're all honorable warriors who protect the weak, and none of them would stoop so low as to attack another knight from behind. That fool died in disgrace. I hope the same won't be true for you. I wanted to shout at him, but he had orchestrated his attack against House Redfort so precisely that there was nothing I could do but sigh and order the festivities to continue. Chapter 39. POV Viserys Targaryen. As soon as Gunther Royce returned to the royal box, I sensed that something bad was brewing, for judging by his cloak, someone had either died or been gravely injured. And judging by the satisfied look on Aemon's face, he surely knows who it is, I thought. A few minutes passed without anything ruining my tournament, and just as I was about to relax, letting my concerns fade into the back of my overly cautious mind, Rhaenyra gasped in shock while clutching her friend Jessamine Redfort, who was in tears. "What's wrong with you, Aemon?" Rhaenyra shouted, rising from her seat, furious. Aemon said nothing and continued watching the joust as if he hadn't heard Rhaenyra addressing him. This is a blatant show of disrespect to the crown, and especially to me, I thought, feeling a deep sense of irritation toward my nephew. "The Princess Rhaenyra asked you a question," said my hand in an authoritative tone. Aemon smiled and turned toward us, placing a hand under his chin, and said, "I didn't hear any question from my cousin unless the angry little girl's scream I just heard was made by our dear delight of the realm. He's openly mocking us, this has to stop," I told myself, gripping the edges of my throne tightly. "You had Jessamine's brother assassinated simply for an innocent remark?" Rhaenyra screamed, outraged. "Jessamine. I wasn't aware that you were so close to Jane's handmaiden," Aemon said, lightly sidestepping the remark. "Young Redfort is well known in the Vale for her talents. It seems the court has had the chance to sample them," said Arnold Arryn, standing behind Aemon with a mocking grin. "Watch your tongue, Arnold. You're speaking to my cousin." "Such matters are part of the princess's private life," Aemon said in an authoritative tone to his knight, who lowered his head, not the least bit bothered by his master's public reprimand. And how could he be? Aemon just saved him from immediate execution. I turned my head as I heard the nobles begin to whisper about Rhaenyra's affairs. In just a few sentences, this demon had turned the situation against Rhaenyra, and everyone had forgotten about the dead heir of House Redfort in favor of a scandal that could cost Rhaenyra the throne. As if it wasn't enough that rumors about Lena Velerion's preferences appeared as if by magic, now Aemon is trying to mislead the court about Rhaenyra's inclinations, I thought, watching Rhaenyra, whose face was red with shame as some of the ladies behind their fans laughed at her. I could even hear some of the men saying, "That's why she was so determined not to marry." "Aemon, your king orders you to provide an explanation that satisfies me, or I will be forced to punish you." Aemon smiled slightly, not taking me seriously, and just when I thought I would have to use force, he said, "You all accuse me of participating in this so-called murder, but I haven't left the royal box. You are the first witness of that. Your Majesty." "He's not wrong. Gunther Royce killed him. Ser Harwin can testify to that, he saw it with his own eyes." "Ser Harwin, your champion. What an irrefutable piece of evidence," Aemon said mockingly. "Aemon," Daemon said seriously, silently ordering his son to behave. Aemon straightened up and said, "Whether Gunther really killed that little Redfort runt or not has nothing to do with me. He's your knight, you're responsible for his actions," Rhaenyra said loudly enough for all to hear. Many nodded in agreement with her, but Aemon, as usual, showed no sign of panic and calmly replied, "Responsible, maybe, but not the one giving orders for all his actions. Gunther swore loyalty to me, but he's not my slave. Those are two entirely different things, unless, of course, that's how you see your subjects, dear cousin. Do you think we're your slaves, bound to obey your every whim?" Rhaenyra, cornered, looked at all the people expecting answers from her without knowing what to say, so I intervened and said, "Don't change the subject." Aemon raised his arms and said, "Ask your questions to the person involved. Don't drag me into these pathetic attempts by a spoiled child to get her father's attention. My uncle, you know perfectly well that if I had wanted someone dead, I wouldn't have done it in such a way, it's amateurish." I locked eyes with Daemon, and silently, we came to an agreement in a matter of seconds. He's still on my side, but he won't abandon his son. "Ser Gunther, what do you have to say?" "Nothing more than what I've already told your city watch commander, who rendered justice in your name at the time," Gunther Royce said calmly. Surprised, I turned to Ser Harwin, as did Rhaenyra, who stared at her champion, astonished, and the next words that came out of my heir's mouth made me want to slap Rhaenyra more than ever before. Forgive me, princess, but what I was trying to tell you is that Ser Gunther simply defended himself after Jasper Redford attacked him suddenly, trying to restore his sister's honor. A sneak attack, then, I thought, understanding that Harwin was trying to spare the grieving Redford girl. Eamon turned to Jessamine Redford, still in tears, and said, "The knights of my house may not all be fine swordsmen capable of winning every tournament, but at least they're all honorable warriors who protect the weak, and none of them would stoop so low as to attack another knight from behind. That fool died in disgrace. I hope the same won't be true for you." I wanted to shout at him, but he had orchestrated his attack against House Redford so precisely that there was nothing I could do but sigh and order the festivities to continue. Chapter 40. POV MC. As I entered my chambers after an exhausting day spent watching nameless knights trying to face renowned ones in order to make a name for themselves and earn a place in the nobility, I found myself whistling with joy. I had won the first battle and dealt a huge blow to Rhaenyra. "Lena, as stunning as ever," I said, looking at my magnificent fiancée, who was watching me with a disappointed look. "So you've decided to sail through the storm no matter the cost," she said in a small, defeated voice. "I once heard your father say that any good sailor, once the storm is spotted, must either avoid it or sail straight into it," I said as I got comfortable, removing everything unnecessary and keeping only a loose shirt that didn't hinder my movements. "I doubt my father said it quite like that, but I do recognize his spirit in the words you just spoke," Lena said, walking around me. "For a long time, I believed that fleeing the capital would allow me to live a more peaceful life, with fewer troubles, but all my problems come from here. I could very well abandon the Vale today, but tomorrow, if war breaks out and I don't have enough dragons or soldiers to ensure the safety of my house, I will be the only one to blame," I said, moving closer to her as I spoke. "And you're ready to go against the king, the future queen, and the most powerful lord in the realm for that?" she asked, pretending not to be troubled by my proximity, which was more intimate than what was generally considered proper. "What can they do?" I asked, spreading my arms wide. "I ordered Gunther to kill Jasper Redford, and everyone knows it. Do you see any chains on my wrists?" I asked, extending my wrists so she could check if any chains were attached. "Aren't you afraid I'll tell what you just confessed to me?" she asked softly, her gaze tinged with a hint of challenge. I raised an eyebrow and then said, "It's your word against mine. And even if Viserys were to condemn me, Eryx is my guarantee of safety. I'd burn his court to the ground before fleeing far away, taking you with me, of course." "Vhagar is much bigger than Eryx," said Lena, the challenge in her eyes growing deeper. "True, but she's also much older than him," I said in a nonchalant tone, without the slightest fear of her dragon. "Though Eryx can't compare to her in terms of flame power or size, he's much faster than she is," I thought confidently, not to mention our spiritual connection, which gave me the advantage of being able to communicate almost instantly with Eryx. A flame lit in Lena's eyes, and I said, as I pulled her close, "No matter her ferocity, she's slow compared to Eryx, and you know it as well as I do. I'd make short work of both of you." Little by little, we got closer until the door to my chambers was slammed open by none other than my mother and father. "Okay, that's really strange," I thought, surprised to see them together. Lena quickly detached herself from my arms and whispered, "We're not finished," before swiftly leaving under the stunned gaze of my parents, whose anger had almost evaporated at the sight of their son about to dip the biscuit. As soon as Lena closed the doors behind her, the anger returned to my parents' faces as if by magic. Maybe I was too quick to think they weren't angry anymore. "Have you lost your mind? You attacked Rhaenyra in front of the entire court. You've just exposed us to the—" I stopped listening the moment my father started talking to me about the dangers of internal conflicts within House Targaryen, because I was the one who had lectured him about it when he used to provoke his brother for a bit of attention, until he realized what it was when Corlys positioned himself as the solution to Daemon's problem. "Are you listening to me?" my father shouted, capturing my gaze, which had drifted off as I was thinking of something else. "I find it quite bold of you to lecture me about internal strife when you're the primary cause of it," I said suddenly. "Excuse me," my father said. "If you had managed to hold your tongue when you were younger, and simply kept your cock in your pants in public, I would be prince consort today, and Viserys wouldn't have had to kill Aemma to get sons. He wouldn't have had to marry Otto Hightower's daughter, and we wouldn't be facing a succession war." "A succession war led by who?" "Alicent's brats," Daemon said, completely ignoring the rest of my argument. I didn't go back to it and said, she's on her 4th child, 4 potential dragon riders and 4 potential royal marriages. You all think that because I don't bow down to worship the great goddess Rhaenyra, I'm her enemy, but you couldn't be more wrong. Explain yourself, Daemon said. I looked my father straight in the eyes and said, I know you have some sort of special relationship with her, so tell her this, my problem only concerns Jane. If she agrees to let her go, then we'll have no more issues. But if not, make sure she knows that I'll turn at least half the realm against her, starting with the North and the Vale, and that I'll ally with the Hightowers to see her stripped of her title as heir. It's been done once before, and I was already the key player in the game. I don't see why I couldn't become that again. After all, like the previous king, Viserys will always prefer peace to war. Chapter 41. POV Rhaenyra Targaryen. How could you make me look like a fool in front of the entire nobility of the realm? I said, glaring furiously at Harwin, who didn't dare meet my eyes. I tried. You tried, you dare say you tried? I said, laughing nervously. You let me dig my own grave in front of everyone before you sealed it yourself. I screamed, throwing a glass near his face, purposely missing despite my anger. I calmed down when I heard commotion at the door of my chambers. I listened closely and heard Ser Eric Cargill arguing with someone. These are the princess's chambers, you cannot enter, he said. And what will you do to stop me, replied the intruder, throwing open the doors of my chambers. It's fine, I told Ser Eric, who was about to put his hand on my uncle. What do you want, Daemon? I asked, staring at him. Daemon smiled softly and said, I need to talk to you. Make your pet leave. I am the princess's champion, Harwin said, frowning. Men and their ego contests, I thought. Leave, I said, not wanting to deal with this absurd cockfight. I noticed the hurt look on Harwin's face, but he said nothing and left, his expression hard and sullen. What do you want? I asked Daemon. Is that how you speak to the only person who still wants to see you on that cursed throne? He said, smiling almost mockingly. You are far from the last person to support me, I said. But I am certainly the last person who can reason with Eamon and bring him to your side, he said. I smiled softly, realizing I had been handling him wrong, and said in a discouraged tone. I find your words utterly ridiculous, but I imagine you have something in mind, or you wouldn't have come here. I'm glad you can still see reason, Daemon said, sitting down and picking up a cup he had taken earlier. I grabbed the wine jug on the table and poured him some, satisfying his ego. Once served, he didn't rush to explain his thoughts and simply savored the wine. The way you pour the wine adds to its flavor, he said, clearly trying to provoke me. Seeing that I wasn't reacting, he rolled his eyes and downed the rest of his drink in one gulp before placing the silver cup down loudly. All right, what you want is to sit on the Iron Throne as queen. The best way to do that without opposition would have been to abandon that sword-swallowing Veerion. Lena is not. Don't even try to defend him, you don't believe it yourself. Plenty of people know about his nature, and believe me when I say Eamon knows too. He won't hesitate to use it when the time comes, because he won't be afraid to do it openly. Viserys is weak, and Eamon knows that perfectly well, Daemon said, irritated by my attempt to lie. You're talking about your king, I said, angry at the casualness with which Daemon spoke about my father. His own brother. You think I've never told him that? Daemon said, smiling. A brief silence fell between us before he broke it without hesitation, saying, Let's put aside my brother's weakness. Eamon is the key piece that could tip the realm toward the children of that Hightower whore. He has no limits, I thought, hearing him speak like that about the queen. I didn't know the boy he was, but I know the young man he is now, and I know there's only one thing he cares about, profit. A secure, risk-free profit that you'll offer him by abandoning that errand wench, who doesn't have a single drop of our blood, Daemon said in a tone I didn't like. The tone of someone giving orders to a servant. I contained my anger and said through gritted teeth. If I abandon Jane, I expose myself to everyone's blades. You're already the target of everyone. You've toured several of the 7 kingdoms and insulted the heirs of these noble houses. That may have been your right, but rest assured, they will remember. They might not wear green yet, but that won't last long, he said. You seem to forget that I have the Veerions on my side, uncle, I said. The Veerions. Daemon said, chuckling, there are no more Valyrians, Rhaenyra, don't you see? After this tournament, no Valyrian will have a dragon. Lena will take her husband's name, and Rhaenyra will be under your thumb. Corlys, in trying to place his blood on the throne, has lost his advantage. I widened my eyes, realizing I had foolishly assumed that Rhaenyra and Lena would always listen to their parents. I had completely forgotten that Corlys had just handed over the keys to the kingdom. To me, but also to Eamon, I thought. Even though we each have 2 dragons, Eamon still has an overwhelming advantage, even more than before, because we won't be able to stand against Uryx and Vhagar in a war. Syrax is far too young, as is Seasmoke, I thought. Very well, arrange a meeting between us. If Eamon can meet my demands, I'll do the same. Daemon smiled, truly pleased with our exchange, and said, I'm glad you finally realized who your true family is. That realization was the final push for me to seek an alliance with Eamon, but you still have to convince Eamon of the same, I said. Who says that isn't already done? Seeing that I didn't understand what he was implying, Daemon smiled and stood up to leave, saying, We'll be waiting for you at the White Worm's brothel at the hour of the wolf. Chapter 42. POV MC. I entered the White Worm brothel accompanied by my uncle Gunther and Arnold Arryn, who acted as bodyguards. I trusted no one in the city of Sin, where anyone might take their chance to kill me far from my dragon, in a typical street assassination. I quickly noticed that this brothel was different from the few pleasure houses I had seen in Runestone or elsewhere. Though I've never frequented one myself. The atmosphere was festive, and people were engaging in acts of debauchery everywhere, indifferent to the stares of others. This is a giant orgy, I thought as I walked a bit faster, slightly repelled by such places due to my upbringing, both in this world and the previous one. Regardless of the upbringing I had, the parents who raised me disliked these kinds of places and found them filthy. A judgment I seem to have adopted as well. A few moments after entering this den of depravity, a young woman appeared and asked us to follow her to the lower levels, where I found 4 people gathered around a fireplace. Rhaenyra, her faithful lapdog Ser Harwin, my father, and the so-called White Worm, Miseria, who was supposedly lost at sea, I thought, frowning as her survival and her nearly identical hair color to ours made it clear she wasn't Baelin's mother, confirming my initial suspicion. I noticed there were only 4 chairs, one for Daemon, one for Miseria, one for Rhaenyra, and one for me. I glanced at my chair but didn't bother to sit and said, I have little time, so let's get this done quickly. I want your answer right now, Rhaenyra. There's no rush. I can have refreshments brought if you'd like. I don't recall speaking to you, I said, frowning at the woman who had trampled on my mother's dignity. Daemon, sensing the tension between us, frowned but said nothing, though it wasn't necessary. Miseria humbly responded, standing up and stepping behind her chair. Forgive me, my prince. I overstepped. I frowned at the insincerity of her apology, but I acknowledged the effort and moved on. That's not why I'm here anyway, I thought, refocusing on my objective, securing my cousin Rhaenyra's support. I'm willing to support your candidate for the title of Warden of the Vale, but only on one condition. Very well, tell me, I asked, slightly curious but mostly certain of what she would ask. I want you to swear allegiance to me and publicly support me as the one and only heir to the Iron Throne, Rhaenyra said, lifting her chin slightly. I raised an eyebrow and asked my cousin, incredulous. You want me to turn the Hightowers and all their allies against me for you? If you agree to declare for me. She began, but I didn't let her finish, already knowing what would happen and what they would do. The Hightowers and the rest of the world wouldn't stand a chance against us, given our 4 dragons. Everyone would abandon Alicent and her brood. I would marry my first daughter to your son, and I'd be the father of the queen. I'm only 15, Rhaenyra. I've sworn allegiance to my king, and I intend to keep my oath. As for the rest, we'll see how things unfold. Then I won't support you. Fine, then we have nothing more to discuss, I said, shrugging, not too disappointed, knowing I had dozens of ways to knock her off her pedestal. I have another proposition, Rhaenyra said, stopping me from leaving. I raised a questioning eyebrow in her direction, and she said, I'll withdraw my support from Jane, but you step away from the heir question. You don't support anyone, and we remain neutral, not interfering in each other's affairs. I quickly weighed the pros and cons, then nodded, very well, we have a deal. Anyway, I don't like court life. All I want is to live peacefully and survive with my dragon through the dance. The rest doesn't matter to me. Let them tear each other apart if they want to. As I turned toward the exit for the second time, I heard my father cough and say, "Aren't you forgetting someone?" I raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised. "You want a piece of the pie?" "I already have a piece of the pie. All I want is both of your support to counter Corley's voice in the council," he said. "For what?" "I want the right to impose whatever taxes I see fit across all my lands," Daemon said with a small smile. Well played, I thought, admiring this clever and potentially lucrative demand. "And Corley opposed this because he fears that due to your quarrel, you'll raise taxes on his goods," I said, understanding the concerns of my future father-in-law. "Which I fully intend to do," my father said, raising a cup in the air for a silent toast before downing it. "I have no problem with that, but I want 10% of whatever you make from it," I said. "Same here," Rhaenyra added, following my lead. Father grimaced before finally agreeing, saying, "What wouldn't I do to see the sour face of that old serpent?" I nodded, uninterested in staying any longer, and said, "If that's all, I've got things to do. Good night." My father gave me a dismissive wave to leave, which I did, while Rhaenyra followed my example and also exited Miseria's brothel, just a few meters behind me. We could have walked back together, but I had nothing to say to her. We were just partners in a transaction, nothing more. Chapter 43. -6 days later. -3 RD POV. The capital, bustling with the finals of all the competitions that were about to begin, stood in stark contrast to the atmosphere of the palace in recent days. Although the tournament held in honor of the weddings of Prince Aemon and Princess Rhaenyra had started with a bang, marked by the death of Jasper Redfort's heir, brother to a friend of Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, killed by the Bronze Giant, uncle and right hand of Prince Aemon Targaryen, the electric atmosphere had quickly settled. The protagonists of this affair were no longer speaking to each other, and Princess Rhaenyra spent a lot of time alone, ensuring she had no other company except that of her cousin, Lena Veerion, with whom she had grown unexpectedly close. Though there was nothing suspicious about the two ladies speaking together, since they would soon become both sisters-in-law and cousins-in-law, some sharp minds noted this sudden friendship and paid attention to it, as not everyone would be pleased to see House Veerion gain more power, or to see Rhaenyra, the legitimate heir to King Viserys, ascend the throne with Aemon Targaryen as her protector, thanks to a reconciliation initiated by House Veerion. The calm in the Red Keep had all the signs of a calm before the storm. MC POV. "I heard you reconciled with my daughter," my uncle asked me, watching the axe-throwing finals begin. "Who told you that?" I asked. As far as I knew, Viserys didn't have a master of whisperers, so whatever he knew was what his courtiers had reported to him. Or what members of his family directly told him, and in this case, it could only be Daemon or Rhaenyra, I thought, leaning more toward my father but not entirely ruling out my cousin. "Is it true?" he asked without answering my question. I shrugged somewhat nonchalantly before saying, "I'm not sure. We reached some kind of agreement, but to say we're reconciled." "I see. And what brought about this change?" my uncle asked. "We just acted like adults, set our pride aside, talked, and realized we didn't need to oppose each other because we could cooperate to achieve our common goals," I said, trying to explain our pseudo-reconciliation without really doing so. "I'm glad you've cleared things up," my uncle said. I nodded, still paying attention to the competitions, as an idea had formed in my mind from watching these useless contests unfold one after another. Rhaenyra Targaryen POV. I frowned slightly as I watched my father and cousin whispering constantly, wondering what they were discussing. "Don't worry, princess. Whatever he's planning, we'll stop him," Jane said, her face expressionless, maintaining a cold and indifferent front. Something I admire about her, I thought, as I normally struggled to control my emotions and not let them show on my face. I forced a small smile at my cousin, whom I knew I would be forced to betray, and refocused on the competition to avoid facing her, but that was without counting Jessamyn's whispered intervention. "He will pay for it, he will pay for my brother's murder with his life." I pretended not to hear her, but I glanced at Ser Harwin, who immediately understood what I wanted to convey. He waited a few minutes, then stood and said, "I'll be back." "Where are you going?" I asked, playing the part to hide my lie. "To talk to my brother. He's been bothering Lord Selwyn's daughter for too long," he said, looking at his brother in the distance, who was indeed talking to a woman with nearly platinum blonde hair like ours. I nodded to give him permission to leave, which he did, and I prayed. Let's hope the situation doesn't escalate. Gunther Royce POV. Follow me, said Ser Harwin Fort, commander of the Gold Cloaks, as he passed by, bumping my shoulder and giving me a venomous look. I frowned, not understanding what had just happened, but I caught Eamon's gaze and realized he had heard everything and wanted me to follow, which I eventually did. Once alone, I asked, what was that about? Sorry for bumping into you. I came to warn you on behalf of the princess. It seems something is being plotted against Prince Aemon. What kind of thing? An assassination attempt or something else, Ser Harwin said, uncertain of what exactly was being planned. Faced with his lack of certainty, I asked. How can I trust you? I simply overheard Jessamine Redfort muttering that your prince would pay with his life. It wasn't a threat, she said it in a way that suggested it was imminent, as if she was impatient for it to happen, Ser Harwin replied. I was about to say something more, but he left, concluding. I've told you what we know. Now it's up to you to take action. The princess has done her duty toward the prince. I nodded, my head filled with countless questions. Feeling my temper rising, I took a deep breath before returning to Eamon's side. Eamon didn't ask me anything, so I stayed silent until cheers erupted in the stadium for the winner of the axe-throwing competition. The king stood to applaud the champion like everyone else, and it was then that Eamon asked me, what did he say? You're potentially targeted, I said, observing his face, which didn't change in the slightest. I figured it was too quiet, Eamon said with a smile, continuing to applaud the champion before sitting back down, not showing the slightest sign of panic. Blood will be spilled, I thought, recognizing that kind of smile on my nephew's face after 44. POV Aemon Targaryen. Now that the axe-throwing contest is over, we can finally move on to the serious stuff, said my uncle, an eager smile on his face, ready to see who would be the champion of the melee. I nodded, smiling, and said, I agree. Are you going to participate? He asked my uncle, who merely shook his head. I frowned at this lack of respect, and I called my uncle's name, emphasizing it so he'd realize what he was doing, Gunther. Forgive me, your majesty, I was lost in thought, he said. No harm done. I see you are also excited about the competition, said the king to the bronze giant. It's a shame you're not participating, said my uncle Viserys, with a slight sigh, regretting not being able to see my other uncle Gunther in action, sword in hand. I decided not to have him compete. Gunther is my right hand, and I don't want anything bad to happen to him, I said to my uncle, nodding toward the heir of House Corbray, who was glaring at us intensely. By killing the heir of House Redfort, you've made some powerful enemies, the king said to Gunther, nodding in understanding. Gunther said nothing and chose to remain silent, an attitude I approved of. We watched as knights entered the melee one after the other, eager to make a name for themselves. Why are there so many of them participating? I asked, watching the heirs of great houses join the fray. They all hope to earn a favor from me, said Viserys, with a slight smirk. He's doing this to gather the best and most ambitious knights. It wouldn't surprise me to see some of these currently unknown knights guarding the gates of the Red Keep once the tournament is over. That's how he recruited Criston Cole. I didn't know the king's favor was at stake, otherwise, I might have sent my uncle to fight in my name, I said, jokingly. It's a tradition I started to reward the best knights of the realm. The champion of the melee has the right to make a request, which I will grant if I deem it feasible. That's a fine practice. I might implement it in the Vale. The Vale? Asked my uncle. Damn, I thought, realizing my tongue had slipped. Many knights wandering the Vale are talented, but due to their isolation or lack of noble presence, they aren't recognized for their true worth. I'm depriving myself of excellent knights who could defend my interests, I said, trying to recover with a nonchalant tone, as if I hadn't noticed what my uncle had really picked up on in my sentence. I turned to him at the end of my sentence with a small smile, and he did the same, forcing a small smile on his face, though I could clearly see the gears turning in his mind. Anyway, it doesn't change anything. The wheels are in motion, and no one can stop them. By tomorrow, Rhaenyra, my father, and I will control the majority of the dragons, I thought, focusing on the melee that had begun. POV Leowyn Corbray. Mark, Alistair, I trust you to watch my back, protect me, I said to my two friends, who were also Jasper's friends and had decided to help me. Both nodded, then took their positions. Very quickly, we found ourselves overwhelmed by all the knights fighting fiercely for the king's favor. Unfortunately for them, I was determined to win it, and armed with Lady Forlorn. Few could withstand more than 3 strikes from me, for even though I wasn't an exceptional swordsman, I wielded my house's Valyrian steel sword and fought to win. For revenge, not for some useless praise, I thought, narrowly dodging a sword blow that could have ended my winning streak. I slashed my sword at his face with all my strength. My opponent blocked the strike with his sword, which shattered under the weight of the impact and the sharpness of my blade. "Surrender," I said, placing my sword at his throat. He accepted, throwing the broken half of his sword to the ground. That's the 5th one, I thought. I surveyed the area, now much more deserted than at the start, and counted about 20 participants left. Corpses lay scattered on the ground, but it didn't bother me. It wasn't the first time I had seen a corpse. In fact, I hoped to see one very soon, I thought, looking at Prince Aemon, who was staring back at me. POV Aemon Targaryen. This is pathetic, I thought, realizing now what Jane and Jessamine had been plotting. A duel, I thought, disappointed, as I had expected something more sophisticated, like an assassination in the streets of the capital or even poisoning. After all, I had deliberately withheld information about my sword training for moments like this, so they would continue to underestimate me and try to catch me off guard. Without realizing that the real fools in this story were them all along. "You're not enjoying this? You seem upset," Viserys asked me. "As you've surely heard from the many rumors circulating about me in the capital, I have trouble with the sight of blood," I said, dodging the question, as it was partly true. I didn't enjoy killing. I did it only to gain attribute points, and I didn't like unnecessary deaths. I only kill personally when it's absolutely necessary. Usually, I leave those tasks to my subordinates. I understand you, in part. Personally, I don't like unnecessary conflicts. But you organize tournaments. I am king. I nodded, understanding his point of view, before pointing out to my uncle the obvious cheating of the 3 companions in the arena, who had teamed up to eliminate an excellent knight in the service of House Veerion. "Leowyn Corbray really wants to win this melee to stoop to such tactics," I said lightly. My uncle responded, saying nothing more. I frowned at the lack of response and added, "I imagine he'll ask you to reconsider the judgment against Gunther." Seeing that he still didn't respond, I narrowed my eyes slightly, mentally preparing myself to do something I didn't enjoy. Chapter 45. POV Leowyn Corbray. Facing the last knight in the melee, wearing a Baratheon surcoat, I struggled to defeat him. The bastard was good, but I had more endurance than him, so I managed to hold my ground. However, I eventually decided to ask for help from Mark and Alistair, because unlike the easily breakable swords, this one used a hammer. The 3 of us ganged up on him, and without much difficulty, we sent him to join the other knights eliminated from the competition. "Thank you," I said, looking at Mark Waxley, cousin of the current knight of Wickenden, and Alistair Stone, bastard son of the Lord of House Coldwater. The 2 of them sheathed their swords and stepped aside to join the other eliminated knights. No one applauded me, not even the king, because even though there were very few rules in a melee, I had clearly lacked honor and cheated to win. But that no longer matters now because I have what I came for, I thought as I knelt before the king. He stood up and addressed me, saying, "Sir Leowyn Corbray, one can easily say that today you have distinguished yourself not by your martial prowess but by your strategic talents." The king's courtiers laughed at his joke, finding it particularly amusing, but not me. Seeing that I didn't respond and simply remained silent, the king raised his hand for the crowd to stop laughing. He regained a serious expression and asked me, "Given your determination, I assume you have a request to submit." I nodded and said, raising my head, "My friend was murdered while under your majesty's hospitality. I ask that his killer and the one who ordered this abomination be punished." "I imagine you're referring to what happened to the young heir of House Redfort," the king said. "Yes, your majesty. As you know, the commander of the City Watch has already judged this matter and reported to me that your friend died by his own fault. I wouldn't dare question Ser Harwin's word, much less your majesty's judgment, but I was there and saw everything. Gunther Royce, that vile bastard, does not deserve the title of knight, and the son of a whore who ordered him to kill my friend should be tried for treason, for not only did he break the king's peace, but he also violated the guest right," I said quickly and loudly so that everyone could hear me. If the king sweeps this matter under the rug, he'll create a dangerous precedent where anyone can kill in his court without being held accountable, I thought, recalling my liege lady's words. POV Aemon Targaryen. I smiled softly at the insults from that fool Lewin Corbray and turned my head toward my mother. I saw her shake her head, silently forbidding me from responding to the provocations of the heir of House Corbray. Then I turned my head toward my father, who looked at me without saying anything, but I could see a glimmer of expectation in his eyes. Finally, I locked eyes with Lena, who was just as worried as my mother. Countless thoughts swirled in my mind, but then I simply stopped thinking and silenced all the voices stirring inside me. I stood up abruptly, grabbed Lamentation that I had placed next to my seat, and left the royal box to head into the arena. I could easily hear the murmurs erupting behind me, but I paid no attention to them. All I had in mind was Lewin Corbray. I didn't bother equipping myself, as it wasn't necessary. I didn't need to, especially not against someone like him. As I passed by the eliminated knights who were all glaring at me, I crossed paths with some of my own knights, who struck their fists against their chests. I continued my strides until I entered the arena, where Lewin Corbray stood tall, Lady Forlorn in hand, equipped with a steel shield. That was new, as he hadn't been carrying one when I had come down into the arena. "You're going to pay for my friend's death, you son of a bitch," he said upon seeing me. He lowered the visor of his helmet and charged at me. I calmly drew my sword from its scabbard and waited. I didn't run, didn't dodge, none of that. I simply waited for the strike. As soon as he entered my range, I raised my sword and brought it down with all my strength onto his steel shield. The force I put into the blow, combined with the sharpness of my Valyrian steel sword, caused a deep gash in the shield, so much so that I thought I might slice through it in one go. Good idea, the steel shield, I thought as I shifted my body to the right to avoid the blow from the heir of Heart's home. I positioned my sword defensively because he continued to frantically try to land a strike on my chest or face. As I kept dodging or parrying his attacks, I gradually gained the psychological upper hand over him. The astonishment and shock threw him off balance, and that's when I decided to strike back. I seized an opportunity during a moment of inattention, dodging a sword thrust and charging at him to throw him off balance. Since I had been on the defensive for most of our duel, the change in pace was unwelcome. His surprise and shock quickly turned into panic, and he lost his composure, stumbling while preventing me from landing the fatal blow. Each time he tried to get back up, I kicked him or aimed for his head, sending him back to taste the arena's dirt. I didn't enjoy the situation, for I was boiling with anger. I had always taken insults to my mother very poorly, whether in this world or the previous one, and he hadn't just done it once, no. The bastard had the audacity to do it twice. Chapter 46. After a few minutes of playing this cat-and-mouse game, he could no longer get up before I raised my sword and struck him with Lamentation. I hit his steel shield, breaking it into several pieces, some of which hung from that scum's arm, still attached because of the straps. Then, I struck again, and he tried to defend himself with Lady Forlorn, but he had no strength left, and I had too much. The force of my blow sent his Valyrian steel sword flying a few meters away from us, and that's when I saw the fear in his eyes. "I wasn't planning on killing you, I just needed to hurt you a little. You don't have to do this, if you spare me, I'll serve you," he said quickly. "Where is that loyal friend, that brave knight ready to save the widow and the orphan, huh?" He turned his gaze toward the royal box, maybe toward Jessamine, Jane, Rhaenyra, or perhaps the king, but I placed my sword on his cheek, piercing his skin slightly to make him turn his gaze back to me. "You've crossed the line. No one can help you now, but if you tell me what I want to know, I might reconsider my decision." Lewin Corbray nodded, so I asked him, "Who wants me dead?" "It was Jane Arryn, she promised me her hand if I agreed to kill you," he said, pointing at Jane, who looked at me, stunned. I nodded, not surprised at all since he had just confirmed what I already knew, and I smiled at Jane. Even though he pointed at her, apart from me, Lewin, and her, no one knew who he was pointing at or why, because no one could hear us. "Were you?" His words stopped abruptly, replaced by gargling sounds, as I pierced his throat with a swift motion. "You should have kept your mouth shut," I said before pulling my sword out of Lewin Corbray's throat. I grabbed Lady Forlorn's sheath, then took a few steps before bending down to pick up the ancestral sword of House Corbray. I sheathed Lady Forlorn in its scabbard before returning to the royal box. The looks and silence as I walked by were proof of the shock that everyone had. Apart from my men, few people, if any, knew about my prowess with a sword. It was understandable for them to be shocked, seeing me take down a man armed like a seasoned knight, as if a 3-year-old child was being taught how to hold a wooden sword. Once I reached my seat, a thought occurred to me. I sheathed my sword, still covered in Léon Corbray's blood, and said, "This sword doesn't suit me. I am not a Royce, you have proven your loyalty, and that's all I expect from my men. Lamentation is yours, uncle." I heard muffled gasps of astonishment, but none of us paid any attention, as my uncle was too shocked and didn't even dare extend his hands to touch the blade of our ancestors. I grabbed his hand and made him hold his new sword by force before sitting down and placing my new Valyrian steel blade beside my seat. I met my father's gaze, and there was a rare gleam in his eyes. Pride. It's not like he taught me how to fight, I thought as I looked away from my father and focused on my mother, whose narrowed eyes revealed her anger. I'm going to feel this reprimand, I thought, smiling, before finally turning to Lena, who, contrary to what I expected, wasn't looking at me at all and was staring straight ahead. "The gods have spoken," began my uncle Viserys. I smiled as I saw Lena deliberately ignoring me, and just as I was about to turn away from her to focus on my uncle's passionate speech about my bravery, skill, and the will of the gods, I locked eyes with Jane. She was panicking, and that was perfectly understandable, as her little plan to have me killed in an honorable duel had just failed. And now she's starting to fear the consequences of her actions, I thought, smiling at Rhaenyra's cousin. "You played and you lost. Good luck with what comes next," I said without making a sound. I saw Jessamine glance at me before quickly looking away toward the king, which almost made me burst out laughing. I mentally shook my head before turning around just in time to hear my uncle shout, "All hail the champion Aemon Targaryen, Prince of Runestone and Rider of Erupts." He never stood a chance, I thought, waving to the crowd. Name, Aemon Targaryen. Age, 15 years. Title, Prince of House Targaryen. Allegiances, House Arryn, Lady Jane Arryn, House Targaryen, King Viserys Targaryen. Familiar, Erupts. Attributes. Constitution, 289. Strength, 200. Endurance, 200. Dexterity, 200. Agility, 200. Speed, 200. Intelligence, 150. Willpower, 150. Charisma, 150. Perception, 150. Wisdom, 120. Unassigned points, 1. Passive skill. Unburnt LVL 3, your resistance to ordinary fire is 30%, and your dragon lineage is purified by 12%. Chapter 47. POV Daemon Targaryen. Seeing Eamon fight against that fool from House Corbray filled me with immense pride because it was like watching myself through him. It was my blood at work. He had the same ease as I did, the same skill, and the same composure when it came to finishing off an opponent. "He fought well," said Rhaenyra, looking at my eldest more favorably. I nodded and replied, "He destroyed him." Although Balon didn't make any comments, I could easily see him fidgeting in his seat, his eyes wide open, sparkling with joy at his brother's triumph. "You will become like him," I said to my second son. Balon turned to me and quickly nodded before focusing on the herald, who was already announcing the continuation of the festivities. I watched Ser Gunther descend the steps, followed by the Hand's son, Harwin Fort. Rhaenyra's lapdog, I thought, watching Alicent's lapdog following closely behind. I'm eager to know who will win this competition. It might create some conflicts that I could benefit from. POV Aemon Targaryen. I watched Gunther enter the arena, followed by the 15 other finalists, and I smiled, because even though I had been slightly distracted by Jane and Jessamine's little plot, the plan I had set in motion to reign in the Queen was about to begin. Did that woman really think I would let her turn me against the rest of the kingdom, when all I've been trying to do since my birth is survive the dance? I thought to myself as I watched the Queen, who gave me a forced smile. I returned the same smile before turning my gaze away from my uncle's wife to focus on the first duel, which pitted Gwaine Hightower against a knight of House Beesbury. It only took one charge for Gwaine Hightower to emerge victorious, likely due to the favor granted by the knight of House Beesbury, a direct vassal of House Hightower. I smiled as I watched Gwaine Hightower, happy with his triumph, strut like a rooster under the royal box. "Isn't he pathetic, poor fool?" unaware that arrogance precedes a fall, while pride precedes ruin, I thought. Gunther, Criston Cole, and Harwin Fort quickly demonstrated their superiority through their ease on horseback, their skill, and in the case of Harwin Fort and my uncle, their more than impressive colossus-like physiques. It didn't take long before only 4 finalists remained, and as I had arranged, the final duels paired Gunther against Criston Cole, while Harwin Fort faced Gwaine Hightower. Gunther turned to me just before kicking his horse toward the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and I nodded at him. He knew the plan, and he was the first piece of the chessboard that I moved. The first charge happened very quickly, the lances collided with the shields, and Gunther fell to the ground. "It seems the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard has not disgraced himself," I said through gritted teeth to Queen Alicent. Gunther got up and returned with his head down to the box. "Prince," Gunther tried to say, but I cut him off sharply. "I don't want excuses. You had a mission, and you failed. You're being a bit harsh, Eamon. Criston Cole is the best knight in the kingdom. He has defeated your father multiple times," said my uncle Viserys. I looked at my uncle, still maintaining my furious expression without saying a word before turning back to the second competition, which was about to begin. POV Alicent Hightower. I watched my brother face off against the Colossus who was now Rhaenyra's champion, and I prayed to the Seven, my eyes closed, that he wouldn't get hurt. I only reopened them when the trumpet announcing the start of the joust sounded. Very quickly, the two of them urged their horses into a gallop, and within seconds, my heart tightened with anxiety and horror as I saw my brother fly off his horse and crash violently to the ground. A collective gasp drowned out the sound of my brother's bones hitting the ground, and it was only when I saw him lying still that I left the box. When I arrived at the spot where my unconscious brother lay, I was greeted by the sight of squires surrounding his body, along with a maester who lowered his gaze when he saw me. "How is my brother?" I asked, but no one dared to respond. "How is he, maester?" I repeated, though a feeling of dread crept over me with each passing second. "I'm sorry, your grace, there was nothing we could do." "He didn't suffer," the maester said. Noon. POV Aemon Targaryen. Hearing the queen's scream of anguish echo through the silent arena confirmed that the first part of my plan had worked particularly well. It worked too well, even. Thanks to that viper, the embers of conflict between the two factions have been reignited. Criston Cole would have inevitably sought revenge on Rhaenyra by injuring her champion, but now, it's going to be an all-out fight to the death, I thought, already eager to witness this clash of titans, all while ensuring I maintained a shocked expression. I just wanted them to injure each other enough to end the possible reconciliation initiated by Alicent Hightower, but this turn of events is almost too good to be true, I thought, forcing myself to maintain the shocked look on my face, even as joy burned brightly within me. "You shouldn't have tried to make me the scapegoat," I thought as I watched the queen clutch her brother's body, weeping. Chapter 48. POV Rhaenyra Targaryen. Shocked by Gwaine Hightower's death, I wanted to go to his side, but as I became aware of all the eyes staring at me as if I were guilty of his brother's death, I refrained because I didn't want to provoke a scandal at such a moment. I locked eyes with my cousin Eamon, who was staring at me in shock, his gaze full of questions, and even though I wanted to scream that I had done nothing, I simply remained silent. Justifying myself at that moment would only increase suspicions that I was somehow involved in this matter. Finally, after a few minutes, seeing that the queen was in a state of intense distress and would not leave her brother's side, my father stood up and said, "The competition is suspended for now, we will continue tomorrow." I immediately stood up to escape the gossip because, even though I knew I was innocent, the death of Jasper Redfort was still fresh in everyone's minds. And everyone will think I did the same thing as Eamon, I thought as I made my way without looking back towards my personal chambers to reflect and hear Harwin's version of events. A few hours later. "The Silent Sisters have begun anointing your brother with the last rites," said Ser Criston Cole. Seeing that I didn't respond, my gaze lost in the void, he simply fell silent, faithfully standing by me, lending his support with his presence. The door opened, and I heard one of the Cargill twins whisper something to Ser Criston, who after a few seconds returned and said, "The princess requests an audience." "Father will be so angry he'll think she did it on purpose," I thought as I gestured for her to enter. Upon hearing her enter, I turned toward her, but what I didn't expect was that she would bring her brother's killer with her. Furious at seeing the men who had killed my brother, who had proudly paraded earlier, happy with his victory, while I had held my brother's still warm body against me, I stood up abruptly and shouted, "What is he doing here?" Listen to me, Alicent, it was an accident. Rhaenyra tried to defend her champion, but I cut her off before she could finish, saying, I don't care whether it was an accident or not, my brother is dead because of him. For a second, I nearly asked my faithful champion to bring me Ser Harwin's head, but I remembered my father's teachings. Anger is a bad counselor, keep a cool head in all circumstances, Alicent. I dug my nails deeply into my palms to calm myself, and I ordered Ser Criston. Ser Criston, escort them out. The day has been exhausting, I don't want to see anyone anymore. I came in good faith, but if you're going to take it like this, it seems we indeed have nothing left to say to each other, Rhaenyra said, revealing her true hypocritical self because she didn't care about me, only about herself. After a few minutes of screaming in my head all the hatred I felt for the two of them, I asked Ser Criston Cole a question. Do you think he could have done it on purpose? Although I despise the princess, I'm not sure that her champion's act was deliberate, but I did notice something strange. What? I asked, curious to know what had caught Ser Criston's attention. The wood of the lance, it was harder than those usually used in such competitions. If Ser Harwin's primary intent was to injure your brother to show strength, it's possible he accidentally killed him, he said. So he did it on purpose, I said, my previously calmed anger resurging, consuming me with disgust for Rhaenyra, my so-called former friend. I turned to Ser Criston and said, looking him intensely in the eyes. Tomorrow, I want you to avenge my brother. What exactly do you expect of me? How far do I need to go? He asked me. Do whatever you deem necessary to avenge my brother. I trust you and your judgment to ensure this crime does not go unpunished, I said, my voice dripping with hatred. You can count on me, my queen, he said resolutely, bowing slightly before leaving to rest. Tomorrow will be a true test for all of us, I thought. POV Aemon Targaryen. I kicked one of the rats trying to scurry past me, disgusted by these creatures, and looked at the men in front of me, speaking with a slightly jubilant tone. What do you think would happen if tomorrow all the nobles in the kingdom were made aware that the realm is on the verge of plunging into the most deadly civil war in the history of the Seven Kingdoms because of the actions of a little confessor, and a crippled one at that? The men chuckled slightly, then said, I imagine it would be the end of my story. Lares, I wasn't sure you'd have the guts to go through with the plan we concocted together, but I'm glad you did, because it means that from today onward, you are bound to me. If I fall, you fall with me, I said, for my part of the plan had only required me to make Gunther lose intentionally. I had been so good in my role that everyone believed I was still angry with my uncle, when it was all just an act. But not the other way around, he noted. He's a smart man, I enjoy talking to intelligent people. It completely reduces the risk of betrayal as long as I offer him advantages and bind him tightly to me, whether through the protection I provide, the marriage I could arrange for him, the future benefits from our cooperation, or simply the threat I represent in case of betrayal, I thought as I looked at the second son of the king's hand. Unfortunately not, I said in a nonchalant tone. Lares nodded, not the least bit disturbed, as he had probably thought this through before sabotaging his brother's lance. I don't mind as long as I stay alive. I'll make sure your feet never touch the ground, even if it means I have to crawl beneath them. I quite like that turn of phrase, but just as when you first approached me, I don't like empty words, I said, not fooled for a moment by the illusion he was trying to create of himself as a loyal servant, ready to do anything for his master. You have a second mission for me, he asked, intrigued. I want Queen Alicent to know that your brother only wanted to teach hers a lesson, not hurt him, I said, as I didn't want to leave anything to chance, while avoiding exposing myself personally. How can I do that? He asked. I raised an eyebrow, pretending to be disappointed by his question, and added. I'm disappointed, I didn't think you'd give up at the first difficulty. Forgive me, my prince, trust me, I'll manage, he said, regaining his composure. I nodded before saying. Very well, because that's not your only mission. I also want you to tell your brother that you heard people saying the princess may have lost her virginity to Ser Criston Cole. You want a death match? He asked, frowning. I want nothing. I simply think you would make a magnificent lord of Harrenhal, I said before asking him, don't you think so? Chapter 49. POV Rhaenyra Targaryen. Am I wrong, or is this the first time I've seen you sit next to me? Are you no longer afraid of being seen with me? I said, slightly bitter, to Eamon, who had sat beside me accompanied by his two sworn shields, Ser Gunther Royce and Ser Arnold Arryn. Soon Lord of the Vale and Warden of the East, I thought, eyeing this distant cousin about whom I knew absolutely nothing, apart from his overwhelming ambition that had placed him at the mercy of my first cousin. I fully demonstrate my support for the legitimate heir to the Iron Throne because I believe her innocent of the accusations spread by the Red Keep's rumors. Honestly? I asked, slightly suspicious. May the old gods and the new curse me here and now if I lie or have any doubt about your innocence, he said seriously. You don't need to make such an oath to prove your good faith, I said, feeling slightly embarrassed by my overly suspicious, almost aggressive behavior. Eamon smiled and said, since I am not lying, it does not threaten me at all. I nodded, feeling more at ease because I knew the piety of House Royce members. They all prayed, whether to the old or new gods, and all were deeply devout. I haven't seen you with your mother once during the tournament and the banquet, I remarked. Eamon glanced at his mother for a few seconds before shrugging and saying, she doesn't like being the center of attention, and unfortunately, my presence does not go unnoticed. I nodded, and then it was Eamon's turn to say, I fear we are about to witness a bloody fight. You'd be better off yielding to Alicent's champion. I looked at my cousin, saying nothing, waiting for him to explain his thoughts, which he did by adding. Gunther told me he ran into Queen Alicent's champion this morning, and he was preparing like a man ready to fight to the death. That's just like Alicent, I said furiously. If her champion had accidentally injured mine, she would have simply advised me to read a verse from the holy book about the mother's compassion and mercy, but... Your champion killed her brother, Rhaenyra, Eamon said. But it was an accident. He only wanted to teach him a small lesson, not kill him, I replied. Eamon shrugged and said nonchalantly. Accident or not, he remains the murderer of her brother. Do you think Jessamine could forgive Gunther or even me for the death of her brother? That's different, you had him assassinated, I said, irritated. Eamon raised an eyebrow, and I immediately realized I had gone too far. Eamon said, I thought we were beyond such suspicion spread by the rats of the court. I apologize, I said, trying to patch things up. It's nothing, he said before focusing on the joust, which was about to begin between the day's protagonists. POV Alicent Hightower. I watched Larry Strong, remembering the words that had haunted me all day. I beg you to forgive my brother, he only meant to teach a lesson, not kill him. He must die. He killed my brother, that's justice, I thought as I stood to hang my favor on my loyal champion's lance. I watched Rhaenyra appear at my right to tie her favor on her champion's arm, and without a word, expressionless, I took my seat beside the king, who, feeling the tension between his daughter and me, awkwardly placed an arm on my hand. I withdrew it, disgusted by his touch, recalling how fiercely he had protected his daughter's champion, refusing to give me justice. Me, his own wife, I thought, clawing at the skin around my nails, something that had always disgusted my father but that I did to keep from losing my mind and to maintain my composure in all circumstances. Sound of the horn. The sound of the horn signaling the start of the joust pulled my mind and attention back to the competition just in time to see Ser Criston charging and shattering his first lance against the shield of my brother's killer. Crayak. Only 6 lances left, I thought, remembering the duel was set to end after 7 lances or a draw. The pressure in my heart slightly eased as I watched Ser Criston Cole smoothly withstand the blow from the giant and gracefully pass by his squire to quickly grab a new lance and return to face Rhaenyra's champion. Crayak. Only 5 lances left to bring him down, I thought as I heard the sound of both lances shattering almost simultaneously. Crayak. Only 4 lances, I thought, clasping my hands and closing my eyes to pray to the 7. Crayak. Only 3 lances, I thought, gripping my hands tighter and tighter, pleading with the stranger to take this murderer and the warrior to grant Ser Criston the strength to defeat the hand of the king's heir. Crayak. I suddenly opened my eyes at the sound of the crowd roaring and stood to see who had won. Relief washed over me when I saw Ser Criston still sitting tall on his horse. It's not enough, I thought, watching Harwin Strong move on the ground, clearly injured in the leg. I want his head, I screamed internally, trying to convey all the hatred I felt for that man to my champion through my gaze. Chapter 50. POV Harwin Strong. Damn it, I've sprained my ankle, I thought, feeling the pain as I tried to get back on my feet. Criston Cole walked past me, smirking before spitting in my direction and saying, "You and your bitch are worthless." Some of the Red Keep squires were overheard in brothels boasting about how Criston Cole abandoned the princess's service because he had taken her, Rose. My brother's words hit me square in the face at that moment, and I shouted to my squire. Sword and shield. I gritted my teeth, silencing the pain I felt, for no physical agony would stop me from putting that piece of shit on the ground for what he dared to say about my wife, I thought, firmly strapping the shield to my arm while the Queen's champion also equipped himself with a shield and a flail. POV Aemon Targaryen. Yes, this is perfect, I mentally screamed, hearing the powerful roar from the heir of House Strong. What the hell is he doing? I muttered to myself, loudly enough for Rhaenyra to hear as I abruptly stood up, pretending to be shocked. What is he doing? Rhaenyra asked, stunned by her champion's behavior, who had just sighed in relief after seeing her champion still alive despite the violent fall from his horse. Criston Cole must have provoked him, and your fool of a champion is walking straight into the trap. I didn't know there was such bad blood between the two. Were you aware of something? Of course not, Rhaenyra replied, but I didn't need to know she had slept with both to understand that she was lying straight to my face. That's odd, I said, watching the fight begin. And what a fight, I thought as Criston Cole unleashed fury on Harwin Strong's shield. This fight makes no sense. Father, stop this madness, Rhaenyra shouted, standing up. Viserys, uncertain, was about to stop the fight, but Alicent stood up and screamed. He's the murderer of my brother, your champion who couldn't accept his defeat. The fight won't end until he surrenders or my champion takes his head. Viserys, stop this fight. Today is the day our children are to be married, Rhaenys said. I adore you, dear aunt, but don't get in the way of my plans, I thought. Almost immediately, Corlys stood up and said, my wife is right. Shedding blood on the day. Silence, I shouted, rising to my feet. I fixed my gaze particularly on Corlys Veerion before saying. The king organized this tournament and set the rules. The king's word is law, but the opposite is also true, forcing the king to lie is a crime. So, sit down, all of you, and wait for the fight's conclusion. They're fighting to the death, don't you see that? Rhaenyra screamed, panicked and furious. I replied with no apparent emotion, both knights accepted the terms of the fight. If one feels defeated, he will say so, and the king will stop the fight if necessary. Now, sit down and wait. Eamon. She started through gritted teeth, but I immediately stopped her, invading her space and whispering, look around you. She did so quickly and saw that no one cared about the duel anymore. Their attention was focused on the royal box. You're making a spectacle of yourself, humiliating your father in front of almost the entire nobility. Do you also want them to think the Valyrians rule the kingdom through you? Rhaenyra clenched her teeth and finally sat down. Seeing Rhaenyra back down, everyone else followed suit, and I sat down last, nodding to my uncle, who thanked me with a nod in return. Though the atmosphere was electric, everyone eagerly awaited the victor of this battle. Harwin Strong, who had been hiding behind his shield since the start of the duel, suddenly found himself defenseless as Criston Cole finally shattered his shield. To everyone's surprise, he didn't retreat but leaped forward, tackling the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. As he tried to place his sword at Criston Cole's throat, the latter kicked Strong's injured ankle, forcing him to release his grip on Alicent Hightower's champion. Criston Cole struggled to free himself from the hulking man atop him, and now disarmed, the knightly duel had turned into a gladiator's fight to the death. Both, equipped with steel gauntlets, aimed blows at one another. Lucky he's wearing a helmet, otherwise, your champion would be dead, I said to Rhaenyra, who was on the verge of jumping into the arena to separate them herself. Suddenly, I widened my eyes, having missed the moment, but somehow Criston Cole had managed to remove Harwin Strong's helmet and was raining down furious blows that Strong was blocking with his arms. I felt Gunther tap me lightly on the shoulder, and turning slightly toward him, I heard him whisper in my ear. Lena Veerion and his squire just left the royal box. I glanced at the Valyrians and caught Lena's furious gaze for some reason. I only told her father to shut up, I thought before turning to Corlys, who was anxiously looking around. I furrowed my brow in confusion and suddenly widened my eyes upon hearing Viserys shout, "Separate them, someone separate them." The arena doors opened on both sides, and a crowd of people rushed in, intent on pulling the two knights apart. I could make out a few distinguishing features, some wore black armbands, others green, but they all had the same goal. I just created a bloody battle royale. It'll only take a spark for this to blow up and engulf the kingdom in flames, I thought, almost eager to watch it all go up in smoke. But I suppressed that urge. The fruit wasn't ripe yet, and it wasn't time for harvest. I mentally called for erupts, who quickly descended from the sky and landed just outside the arena. Despite not being inside, his sheer size loomed over everyone, and he could easily stretch his neck far enough to burn anyone to ashes at my command. I shouted, "Stop this madness immediately." Erupts roared right after me, adding more weight to my words, and I then turned to Viserys to let him deal with this mess because even though I had managed to end the fight quickly, the damage is already done, I thought, watching Rhaenyra in the distance, cradling the body of his lover, who had taken a knife to the throat from Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Chapter 51. The next morning. POV Aemon Targaryen. "This place brings out the worst in people," said my mother, stirring her spoon slightly to fully dissolve the honey in her tea. A rare commodity that House Veerion sells at outrageous prices, I thought, sipping mine without a word. "Doesn't this bother you?" she asked me. "Why do you think that?" I asked her, slightly concerned that my calm demeanor regarding recent events might betray my involvement in them. "I don't know, you've been quiet while your future brother-in-law barely escaped death, and his friend is dead," said my mother, her eyes narrowed at my unusual behavior. "So that's what they call a woman's sixth sense," I thought as I observed my mother. I subtly rolled my eyes, more annoyed than sympathetic toward Rhaenyra, as it was his choice to charge headlong into battle with his lover. Of course, I'm shocked by the extent this dispute between Rhaenyra and her stepmother has taken, but I won't lie, this situation isn't bad news. In fact, it opens many doors for me, I said to my mother. "What are you planning to do?" asked my mother, knowing that I was about to stir the pot. "Me? Nothing at all," I said, hiding a slight smile. My mother shrugged and rolled her eyes before saying, "Be careful with your father. The more you advise him, the more he starts using his head to think. What could Daemon possibly do to me that he hasn't already?" I replied nonchalantly, knowing Daemon had isolated himself. His brother doesn't trust him, Rhaenyra doesn't either, he's an enemy of the Hightowers, and he's about to start a war with Corlys Veerion. I'm all he has left. He's your father. "I'm just afraid you'll be disappointed," she said. I smiled, finding her concern comforting, even if it was unnecessary, as I had very few expectations of this kind of person. And none from him. "I can't be disappointed by someone I have no expectations for," I said seriously because it was the truth. Although I tried to show everyone that I had great respect for my father, the reality was quite different. For me, Daemon was just a member of my family and nothing more. He had proven to me many times that he wasn't reliable. I didn't hate him, and there was no bad blood between us, I just knew where we stood. "Very well, if you say so, I'll trust you," said my mother. We were interrupted by Gunther, who knocked on the door and entered directly. He was the only one of my guards allowed to do so because he was family. A subtle sign of trust. "Well?" I asked. "The king has agreed to a private audience," he said with a nod. I nodded and then said, "Let's hope all goes well." "What do you want from the king?" asked my mother. I smiled and asked, "Do you really want to know?" She hesitated before finally shaking her head. I smiled, already knowing the answer, and kissed her on top of her head. I knew her well enough to know that she didn't like all these little plots and schemes. My mother much preferred hunting, horseback riding, and living her life to the fullest in the Vale than being surrounded by gossiping courtiers all day long, nibbling on cakes. POV Viserys Targaryen. "Prince Aemon Targaryen, your majesty," said Ser Criston, his eyes lowered to avoid my furious gaze at the sound of his voice. I stood up to greet Aemon, who didn't waste any time. Upon entering, my nephew said, "I didn't think you'd see me so quickly." "You're my favorite nephew, and you know that," I said, smiling at him as he pretended to hesitate before smiling back. I opened my arms to embrace him, and he didn't refuse. After a few seconds, we released each other and took our seats around a small table. I poured him a cup of wine while asking, "Did you have something in particular you wanted to discuss?" Aemon accepted the cup with a smile, shaking his head before saying, "No, I just wanted to check in on you. I imagine last night wasn't kind to you." I raised my eyebrows as he pointed out the obvious. The little war between Rhaenyra and Alicent had escalated to the point where dozens of knights from important houses nearly killed each other. Not to mention the death of Rhaenyra Valerion's friend, I thought. I don't know what more I can do to reconcile them, I said, exhausted by these persistent conflicts. Have you tried getting them to talk? He asked. I smiled almost mockingly and said, what's the point? They practically see each other as mortal enemies. The relationship between the queen and the princess seemed fine throughout the tournament, Eamon said, swirling his wine thoughtfully. Are you thinking something? I asked, noticing his pensive expression. I'm wondering, he said, snapping out of his trance. About what? I asked. Eamon hesitated before finally sighing and shaking his head. It's not my place. Eamon, you're my brother's son. I regret that you don't feel like it, but you're an integral part of my family. Don't forget that. In private, I'm not your king, I'm simply your uncle Viserys, I said kindly, trying to make him feel comfortable enough to speak frankly. I already have so many people who don't dare tell me the truth because they fear my status. If even my family members start lying to gain my favor, I might as well stop talking to anyone. Eamon hesitated again and glanced at me. I nodded, and finally, he closed his eyes and sighed before saying, Do you remember asking me how we reconciled? I nodded, remembering how he had dodged the question with a carefully prepared answer. I received instructions in advance, and I'm wondering if the same isn't true for Rhaenyra, Eamon said. From whom? I asked my nephew, frowning. From Corlys Veerion, he said, his eyes slightly lowered. Damn snake, I thought, gripping my wine glass tightly. He wants to control Eamon to control Urex and most of the adult dragons through marriage, in order to rule the kingdom from the shadows. And by creating tension between Alicent and Rhaenyra, he's rallying her to his side while manipulating her to further his house's rise. I took a deep breath to calm the anger within me, which was threatening to ignite, and said, I'm glad you had the honesty and courage to admit this to me. I didn't accept, he suddenly said. Surprised by Eamon's words, I raised an eyebrow, my eyes wide, and asked. Why? Because I'm a dragon, a member of House Targaryen, and I only obey one person. That person is you, uncle, he said, an unshakable determination shining deep within his gaze. Chapter 52. POV Aemon Targaryen. My uncle's shocked expression slightly worried me because I wondered if I had gone too far. What I wanted wasn't for him to be suspicious of me, quite the opposite, I wanted him to trust me and confide in me. For that, I must be as transparent as possible about my intentions with him while keeping him distant enough that he can never truly know what I will do or what I am capable of doing, I thought. The heavy silence only heightened my worry that my uncle might have seen through my intentions, but suddenly, he burst into laughter while pouring himself another cup of wine. A fine cup, I noticed, watching the king pour gold arbor until a thin line of wine overflowed from the cup, while I secretly felt the pressure within me ease. Gulp. 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 Ah, my uncle exclaimed as he slammed his cup down noisily before saying, Do you know how many years I've been waiting to hear those words come from your father's mouth with the same sincerity? I shook my head, nearly jumping with joy inside because I had just hooked my prey. Now, I only had to reel him in. Uncle Viserys looked at his now empty cup and said, Too long, far too long. He gazed at me nostalgically, then said, You should have been my son, Daemon doesn't deserve you. I lowered my eyes without saying anything because I didn't even know how to respond to that, but he quickly recovered and asked, changing the subject to cover his brief loss of control. What was the reason for this change of heart? If I understood correctly, you're not without ambition yourself. I smirked, almost mockingly, and said, Ambition is the last word I would use to describe myself. To be honest, I never asked for anything that I have, and fortunately for all of us, it was my mother who raised me because she taught me the meaning of honor, family loyalty, and duty. Indeed, Viserys said, understanding that despite our closeness, the tension in my relationship with Daemon hadn't disappeared, I had simply decided to bury it for a while. Because I still need him. I continued, saying, I know I might not reflect that image because I have a dragon and I'm building an army that could scare a lot of people, including my cousin, but all I want is to live in peace in the Vale. The rest doesn't matter to me. But, my uncle said, looking at me, waiting for me to get to the point. But Jane Eyre is preventing me from doing that, and she poses a threat to me, I said, being as transparent as possible so as not to trap myself in the fine web of half-truths I was weaving throughout this conversation. How? He asked, still not understanding the threat Jane posed. After all, I had a dragon. I have many cousins and collateral relatives with the title of knight who think a Royce by name should be leading our house, I said, trying to guide him to understand the cause of this conflict and its repercussions. I still don't see how Rhaenyra would be a problem for you, my uncle said. I lowered my eyes while playing with my cup and finally said, with a deep expression of regret. I humiliated Jane Eyre and, unwittingly, confirmed the very real rumors about her by breaking off our engagement. I heard about that, Uncle Viserys said, slowly starting to understand. Strike while the iron's hot, I thought. So, I continued, with an annoyed expression. The fragile trust the Lords of the Vale had in her because of her birth has collapsed. She's seeking revenge for that while trying to prove to everyone that she is the undisputed Lady of the Vale. And Rhaenyra is a perfect ally since they are cousins, she has a dragon, and she is the princess of the realm, my uncle said, finishing my sentence. Perfect. If he finished my story himself, it means he believes it to some extent, I thought, nodding. I nodded with my eyes on the ground before looking back at him, saying, I would have liked to stay far from all this misery, but by breaking off my engagement, I unintentionally triggered a conflict between us and, more broadly, between House Royce and House Arryn. I can flee my father in the capital, but I can't escape this. I must now face the consequences of this feud. I better understand your position now. You needed a strong ally to counterbalance Jane, and aside from Rhaenyra, the only one left was Lena, who is the rider of Vhagar. With her, you became untouchable to both Jane and Rhaenyra, my uncle said. I nodded, and he continued, I understand everything you've done so far because it was all carefully planned to protect your house from the storm, but what I don't understand is how you tried to do it. I smiled inwardly because this was exactly what I wanted him to ask so I could prove my unwavering loyalty despite the obvious conflict of interest with Rhaenyra. I don't understand, I said seriously, pretending to be confused by his remark. You're trying to depose Jane based on the fact that she's a woman, but you know perfectly well that would condemn my own daughter to the same fate. I smiled and said, there are two reasons why I chose to use that argument. I'm listening, my uncle said. The first is the most obvious. I chose that argument because it's the easiest to get most of the realm's nobles, who are men, to accept. The Queen's supporters, and by extension House Hightower, would immediately adopt this as their rallying cry. Uncle Viserys narrowed his eyes but said nothing, letting me finish, and I added. The second reason is that the traditional succession laws of Westeros may apply to everyone, but not to us. Why? He asked, frowning. Because we are not mere men. We are Targaryens, and the doctrine of exceptionalism adopted by the faith during the reign of the Conciliator protects us from all the laws or rules that govern ordinary mortals. That also means they didn't choose you over Rhaenys because she was a woman, but because they found you more fit to rule than her. It's as simple as that, I said, bringing the wine cup to my lips and watching my uncle, who was visibly shocked. POV Viserys Targaryen. It's as simple as that. The end of his sentence struck me like a bolt of lightning because the problem that had troubled me for years was now solved after a simple conversation with Eamon. Since the birth of Aegon and Aemon, I hadn't dared to publicly declare my succession because disinheriting my male heirs in favor of a female heir would go against tens of thousands of years of rights and traditions. And against the outcome of the Great Council that placed me on the throne. I also didn't want to give the Sea Snake an excuse to contest the result of the Great Council, especially not now. Why didn't anyone think of that? I said, still in shock. Because it's too simple, maybe. Eamon said, laughing. I don't realize it anymore when I talk to you, but you're only 15, and yet you see further than dozens of old men with years, if not decades, of experience on the small council, I said, sincerely impressed and also annoyed that no one had noticed this. Eamon smiled, flattered, and said, I don't think I see further, but I think I see from further away. I frowned, and he explained. Everyone living here year-round will inevitably have an ambition or a goal. Sometimes, goals align, leading to the creation of factions, but that's not the case for me because I'm a lone wolf. I listened intently to my nephew, and he continued, saying, I have nothing to lose, nothing to gain. I have no bias, I influence no one, and no one influences me. I simply observe, from afar. Eamon, noticing that I still didn't quite understand where he was going, said, If I could think of it, others probably could too, but they either had something to lose once you realized this information or something to gain by keeping me in the dark. I finished my nephew's sentence, furious, because as time passed, I realized that Otto had stopped being my friend the moment Emma died. All he cares about is becoming the grandfather of the next king. Chapter 53. POV Aemon Targaryen. Seeing my uncle deeply lost in thought, I fell silent, waiting to see how much this discussion had affected him. The more doubts he has about those around him, the less he'll have about me. The less he trusts them, the more power I'll have over him, which means, by extension, over the entire kingdom, I thought. Viserys spent a few moments in thought before saying in a light tone, "The wedding won't take place until tomorrow." "I know," I said, as I had been informed by the servants. "Marry Rhaenyra," he said softly, in an almost pleading tone. I raised my eyebrows in surprise, and for a moment, I considered it. I took the time to think about it because it was the fastest way to become king without any possible contest from the rest of the kingdom. We would have true Targaryen sons, all of them riding dragons. I know I could dominate her and carve out my place. But, although I trust myself enough and especially Eryx to win the dance, whether in politics or war, even while starting in Rhaenyra's camp, I shook my head in refusal. This is not the path I've chosen. There's still more than a decade before hostilities begin, it's not yet time to take a final position. I must remain flexible. A marriage with the current Rhaenyra wouldn't work for many reasons, the first of which being that I knew I wouldn't tolerate deceit. The future is far too uncertain. In a case like this, I might make a mistake, and it wouldn't even be worth it. "I could make you the king, the true king, equal with Rhaenyra," he said, trying to convince me, but I shook my head again to signal my refusal. I took a few seconds to think and then said, "All I want is a peaceful life. I'm sorry, I already have too many responsibilities. The weight of a kingdom would crush me." Viserys sighed deeply before saying, "The gods are truly cruel. The only heir I truly needed was born from my brother's seed, and the only man I would trust with my daughter in the throne wants neither her nor the throne. It's not. I was a young man too. If you had loved her, or even simply liked her, a woman of such beauty would have stolen your heart in no time," he said, interrupting me. With a smile on his lips. "Let's be thankful I'm not a teenager controlled by hormones then." I smiled without saying anything, and we remained silent for a few moments before he asked me, "What would you do in my place, in such a situation where your wife and daughter are on the verge of killing each other?" I slightly widened my eyes, surprised by the question, and thought inwardly, I wouldn't let such a conflict escalate this far. I would try to balance the forces as much as possible. Right now, Rhaenyra has far too much power, much more than she seems able to handle. "That's normal, given that she's my heir," he said. "Certainly, but she won't raise your 4 other children, 4 potential dragon riders, and 4 possible alliances with major houses, or even great houses," I said honestly. Seeing that he didn't respond, I added, "If I were you, I'd try to get to know the members of your wife's faction as well as your daughters and balance the forces, starting with the small council. It's not as easy as you seem to think. They're not going to kindly tell me they support my wife and hope Aegon will dethrone his sister," he said, already unconsciously taking Rhaenyra's side. His whining tone slightly irritated me, and I said, "That's the problem. You're thinking as if you were already dead, my uncle. I must ensure my succession. The succession won't take place for a long time. You're still young, you have years before all this happens. If you try to slowly change things around you, you could avoid a fratricidal war," I said, slightly excited because this was his problem. This chronic passivity. "If you think your wife will have a harmful influence on your children, then place them as wards with vassals you trust. Take time to teach them the history of our house and the importance of loyalty to our family, especially to the head of this house. You still have time to change everything," I said, sincerely believing what I was saying, because it would be much simpler if everyone lived in peace. It's really naive to think this way, but even if it doesn't happen like that, I'll still have a place of trust with my uncle. "My word doesn't carry much weight anymore," Viserys said, revealing a crack in his armor. "You're the king," I said, trying to exploit it. "And that's all I am. I'm not like the kings who preceded me. I'm no longer the rider of Balerion, otherwise, you'd never have had the nerve to threaten Rhaenyra with your dragon in my presence." I wanted to defend myself, caught off guard by this sudden change in attitude. But he interrupted me and said, "Don't you dare deny it. I saw how Eryx descended from the skies. That wasn't luck, you don't need to communicate with him. I hesitated for a second before deciding to take a risk. I won't deny it. My bond with Erix is more special than the one dragon riders usually have. I'd even go as far as to say that my bond with Erix is unique. Viserys frowned but said nothing, so I continued, frowning seriously. I shouldn't have done what I did, but just because I have no ambition doesn't mean I'll let anyone crush my pride, trample my dignity, or disrespect me, whether they're a friend of my cousin or not. So it's true, you can command him without speaking, he said, more focused on the information I had revealed than on the rest of my sentence. I nodded, and he said, that's magnificent. I smiled, understanding that he had just bluffed to test me, and I had likely passed, judging by his smile. Even though he just tricked me into confirming that I can command Erix with my mind. He then said, I must prepare, I have a small council meeting. I greatly enjoyed this little discussion, and we should have more of them. I'd like that, but I'm afraid we'll have to settle for letters very soon, I said, pretending to regret these little moments of sincerity. You're not staying, he said. It's not my place, I said, shaking my head. Even if I offer you a place on my small council, he asked. I burst out laughing, appreciating my uncle's humor, until I realized he was serious. Really? I asked, stunned by the successive offers my uncle had made today. He didn't reply, but I quickly shook my head, saying, I don't like this environment. It might corrupt me. The mountain air and the beautiful landscapes of the Vale have the power to clear your thoughts and soothe the mind. I wouldn't trade this tranquility for anything in the world, I said, determined to leave this place as soon as possible. It's only been a week since I've been here, and I've already nearly started a war. If I stay a full moon, I might trigger massacres. Very well, I understand, he said, standing up. I stood up as well, thinking he was going to embrace me before I left, but he said, wait, I have something I want to give you. He went rummaging through several chests before finally finding what he was looking for, and I was surprised to see a simple dark red orb. I raised my eyebrows at the jewel he handed me, and he said, Grandfather, I mean, your great-grandfather, had an unparalleled hatred for his uncle. He didn't want to appoint a Master of Whisperers, probably because it was a position inaugurated under Maegor's reign. As his heir, I didn't want to do it either. But I'm forced to admit that I'm the last to know what's happening in this damned kingdom. I don't even know what's going on in my own house. I didn't take the stone, and he continued, I trust you, Eamon, and I'm giving you the task of becoming my eyes and ears, advising me when you sense the winds changing, and most importantly, warning me. Do you feel up to it? I frowned before finally taking the stone, nodding without saying anything. No one must know, he said. And no one will know, I replied. Very well. I'll await your letters eagerly, he said, sitting back down. I gave a slight bow before turning around, trying my best to maintain a serious expression while hiding the stone in my clothes. I just pulled off a hell of a heist. Chapter 54. Hi everyone, how are you doing? Sorry for this slightly late update, I completely fell asleep yesterday, exhausted, because I hadn't slept for more than 30 hours. My sister had to go to the emergency room during the night, so I had to take care of my other sister. In short, it was a bit complicated, but don't worry, this won't affect your updates, as I will be publishing the next chapters tonight. Aside from that, I'm happy to announce that I've decided to keep the option for extra chapters but slightly increase the number of power stones required. The new goal is set at 400 power stones, and there's a reason for that. I started 2 stories before Aemon Targaryen that I'd like to finish. To do so, I need to be able to take a breather without constantly having to write chapters for this fanfic. I know this might disappoint some of you, but I'm doing it because I promised that every story I publish on Webnovel would have an ending. I've been too often disappointed to see stories abandoned midway, whether they were good or bad. I made a promise to myself that no matter the outcome, whether people like my fanfic or not, I would still bring it to a close. It's a matter of respect. I want to thank all of you, whether you've joined with Aemon Targaryen or earlier, for the strength you give me every day. I've come a long way, and even when I don't have the energy or the desire, I manage to find the motivation to write because you are here. Thank you 1,000 times. Ghostwriter 0002. Chapter 54. POV Alicent Hightower. Ever since Viserys had isolated himself to meet Eamon, I couldn't stop pacing around my room while cradling Helena, despite my condition. I was waiting to receive Ser Kristen's report on what Viserys and Eamon had discussed, hoping it wasn't anything serious, when suddenly, someone knocked on the door. "Who is it?" I asked, hoping it was Ser Kristen. "It's me, Your Grace," came the voice of a man behind the door, which I immediately recognized as belonging to my Master of Whispers, Larys Strong. "Come in," I said, disappointed that it wasn't Ser Kristen coming to report what Eamon and his nephew had said. Larys Strong entered my chambers, limping as usual, tapping his cane on the floor with every step, while inspecting the room's interior, which he had seen 100 times already due to the frequent meetings we held in secrecy. I handed Helena to the nurse, who moved away to let her play, and said, "What do you want?" "To serve you, as always," replied Larys, though I didn't believe him for a second. He's a worm who only serves his own interests, I thought, paying no attention to his previous words. "Spare me your flattery, Larys, I'm not in the mood to trust a member of your house," I said sharply. "Even if I offer you the key to bringing Prince Eamon to your side," he said, dropping his fake servile demeanor for a more condescending attitude, pretending to leave. I frowned, surprised by his proposal, but I hadn't forgotten who I was dealing with and asked, "What do you want in return?" "Nothing more than your trust, as well as a favor from you," Larys replied, playing with the handle of his cane, a slight, smug smile at the corner of his lips. "What kind of favor?" I asked, suspicious. "The kind of favor that has no limits," he said, his indescribable expression causing me slight unease. I frowned, refusing to be unsettled, and asked him, "What is this secret you've discovered that could secure me the Prince of the Vale's services?" "Prince Eamon is about to start a war in the Vale, and he has no interest in having this matter exposed," said Larys. "He's going to attack his cousin." I asked, surprised that Prince Eamon would target his cousin, because even though he obviously didn't hold her in high regard, he had little to keep him in the capital. Even less reason to start a rebellion. "Prince Eamon isn't that foolish," said Larys, tacitly insulting me in the process. I narrowed my eyes, waiting for him to explain, and he finally said, "He has made an alliance with the mountain clansmen. If this were to come to light, he would lose many supporters, as the nobles of the Vale consider the clansmen a scourge. But the question remains, how do we prove this information? How can we prove that?" I asked Larys Strong, who shrugged. "Why do you want to prove it?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "What good is information I can't prove?" I said, looking at him as if he were an idiot. "You don't need to. You just need to threaten to reveal this information before he returns to the Vale to give the signal to the mountain clans to attack Jane Eyre's loyal vassals. A simple rumor will be enough to ruin his plan because Jane Eyre's vassals will be prepared," said Larys. "Sure, but that would make him my enemy," I said, not entirely convinced of the effectiveness of this plan. "If you don't want to threaten him, then just invite him right now. Try to make a good impression on him and gauge where his loyalties lie. See if you can buy him off in some way or offer him something to temporarily gain his support," suggested Larys Strong. I nodded, finding this idea much easier to execute and much safer, and said, "I'll see what I can do. You may go." Larys bowed before leaving, and just as he was about to exit, the door swung open wide, and Ser Kristen finally arrived. "You took your time," I said, looking at my champion. "I've just come from the council. His Majesty the King didn't want to release me from his service sooner," he said by way of apology. "Very well, now tell me what you were able to hear," I said, impatient to know what Viserys was plotting behind my back. "I couldn't hear much, but what I'm certain of is that he was talking about you and about ward placements." "I think Prince Eamon wants your children as wards," said Ser Kristen. "If he wants to take my children as wards to Runestone, that must mean he hasn't gotten as close to the Valerians and Rhaenyra as he seemed to yesterday. I still have a chance to win him over to my side. Invite the prince to have tea with me." "I need to speak with him," I said, determined to bring Aemon Targaryen, Prince of the Vale and Lord of Runestone, to my side. "Let's see how you plan to anticipate this, Rhaenyra." Chapter 55. POV Aemon Targaryen. After my meeting with the king, I decided to take some time to relax. Moments of calm are very rare in my life, as I am practically occupied every day of the year, from the first to the last hour. I usually take advantage of these rare moments to perform some acrobatic moves with erupts in the air. I was tempted to do so, but after leaving that meeting with the king, I decided to have some fun and change the cowardly and weak reputation of not knowing how to wield a sword that I had been carrying for a while. I had deliberately misled everyone to have cards to play in case of trouble. I made sure to spread the rumor that I didn't know how to fight and was afraid of blood, to gain an advantage over my enemies. But now that this moment has passed and everyone knows it was all false, I will do the exact opposite. I will strike hard to leave a lasting impression on everyone and build a reputation as solid as possible with the sparring, I thought as I observed the knights sworn to my uncle fighting in the training yard. Are you sure you want to do this? Gunther asked me, looking at the dozen knights gathered in the yard. Don't worry, I know how to hold back when necessary, I said, grabbing a bastard sword from the rack. I had chosen this time of day because I knew perfectly well that at this hour, all the knights present in the training yard were the best. And that was for the simple reason that many young ladies, either alone or accompanied by their brothers or even their parents, were there to evaluate these knights who were unknown to the public. They all hoped to be noticed, to become master-at-arms, captain of a guard, or simply a bedwarmer for the nobility. The knights here were all unknown fighters, but contrary to what I expected, they all seemed very well trained. Some of them could even rival the elite of my bronze shields, I thought while observing the fights. It's probably because they're trained by the king's guards, I thought, watching the Cargill twins give instructions to the knights. Sire, are your trainees looking for a challenge? I said, making sure to speak loudly to attract attention. Not that I really need to. It's just training, my prince, said one of the twins. I have trouble telling them apart when they're together. Same here, I said, not at all discouraged by the excuse he had just given me. The two looked at each other, hesitant, probably wondering how to refuse me without hurting my pride. They're afraid of offending me, but they're also afraid I'll get beaten, I thought, smiling slightly at the twins' cautiousness. Although I had shown everyone my mastery of Westerosi swordsmanship, I had not yet defeated a truly skilled opponent. I hadn't had much to do to defeat Leowyn Corbray. The fool had no advantage over me, whether in terms of physical ability or skill, not to mention that he was exhausted from his previous fights. I smiled and confidently said to the knights, who had stopped training to listen. I will offer Lady Forlorn to anyone who defeats me. Everyone's eyes widened, even the two twins from my uncle Viserys' guard, and they both shrugged as my first opponent stepped forward to face me. What is your name? I asked the knight. My name is Martin, my prince, he replied. From which house? I asked, as most knights sworn to House Targaryen came from noble families. Second or third sons of minor nobility in search of glory, as well as bastards. None for now, he said, confident at the thought of founding one in the future. I wish you success in founding one, I said, lightly tapping my sword against the ground in provocation. Very calmly, my opponent did not take my slight jab to heart and simply observed me, waiting to spot a weakness in my guard. This is getting boring, I thought as long seconds passed without any action, the fight reduced to a staring contest. I deliberately opened my guard slightly to invite him to attack, which he did without delay. I pretended to retreat suddenly to block his strike, surprised by the speed of his attack, and he thought he had me. I gently pushed his sword aside while spinning around much too quickly for him to react. Martin didn't dare move as he felt the steel at the back of his neck. I smiled, knowing I had won. No surprise there. Before raising my sword and saying, "You did well." The knight bowed his head in silence before leaving the training yard directly. Oops, I may have destroyed his confidence, I thought before signaling to all the remaining knights to advance, turning slowly on myself. Let's get this done quickly. POV Corlys Veerion. I watched Eamon gesture to about 20 knights to step forward, and it irritated me as few things had in my life, for he reminded me of his damned father. The same rotten seed. Seeing him smile and act with such arrogance also deeply annoyed me, as I hadn't forgotten how he had ordered me to be silent in front of all the nobility gathered for my triumph, and he had the audacity to address me as if I were a mere worm. Look at him, I couldn't help but say, teeth clenched with rage. He made everyone believe he couldn't wield a sword, and now here he is, playing with damn knights who are all twice his age, I said, gripping the railing of the terrace from which I watched Eamon gracefully deflect his opponent's attacks. He's not fighting with a traditional style, Rhaenys observed, pretending not to hear me. And what could she say? She defends that boy more than our own son when we argue. Seeing that she wanted to ignore me, I said, trying to provoke her. It makes me sick to see him having fun while Rhaenyra is in his room, mourning his friend's death. He should be ashamed. Don't finish that sentence, for the love of the gods, Rhaenys said, turning to me, a fire burning in her eyes, clearly at the end of her patience with my comments. She overprotects this child too much, and he's not even hers, I thought, snorting. Do you think this is normal? I said, gesturing towards Eamon, who was still standing, surrounded by a dozen knights. The other dozen already defeated, I thought, looking at the knights clutching their throats, groins, or ribs. Rhaenys nodded and then said, I find it normal, considering you refused to let him grow up with his cousins over an old grudge. To him, we're no different from strangers. The boy isn't afraid of his father or Viserys, and you think you'll be the one to scare him. I don't want to scare him, I want to teach him the respect he owes me, as the lord of the great house of Valyria. Even Viserys owes me that respect, I said softly, but emphasizing each word to convey my frustration with his attitude. Rhaenys turned away from me, almost disappointed, and said, he will respect you once Lena becomes his wife, to have peace in his household. So unless you don't want peace in yours, stop complaining. I rolled my eyes but chose to remain silent, as Eamon was a frequent source of conflict between us. I was naive to believe that Lena could control this walking disaster. I'll have to find another way to teach him respect, I thought, watching Eamon defeat the remaining knights more and more easily, not at all out of breath from the effort. Why not start with his finances? I've learned that the wool market in Runestone is booming thanks to the partnership signed with the Purple Cloud Trading Company from the Veerion family. Chapter 56. POV Daemon Targaryen. Watching Eamon move gracefully while effortlessly cutting down the knights facing him made me want to fight him to see how long it would take him to defeat me, I thought before shaking my head. I didn't think you'd show up in the training yard, I said to my son once he had placed his blade on the neck of the last knight still standing. Eamon smiled as he lifted the sword from the knight, who, like his 20 other companions, had been humiliated by my son's talents. Then he said, do you want to test yourself against your son? I smiled, knowing he had plenty of good reasons to want to take out his frustrations on me, but I won't let you do it, especially not in front of all these people. I need to talk to you, it's important, I said, changing the subject and returning to the main reason I had been looking for him. What do you want? He asked me, putting back the training sword he had borrowed. Me, nothing at all, but Rhaenyra, that's another story. She has been particularly impatient, so follow me, I said, turning around, only to find myself face to face with the little dog of that Hightower whore. Criston Cole walked past me without greeting me and spoke directly to Eamon while completely ignoring me. The queen requires your presence. Let's go, I said to Eamon, deliberately cutting off that nobody who bowed to every woman as soon as they had a bit of power. Immediately, he added, stepping in front of Eamon, who narrowed his eyes in annoyance as he looked at the king's guard. I gripped the hilt of my sword, but Eamon signaled for me to calm down with a glance before saying, if the queen wishes to see me, then so be it. After all, who am I to refuse an order from her grace? Lead the way, sire. I narrowed my eyes at him, but the only thing he said was, we'll talk later. Once I've finished with the queen, I'll join you in my cousin's chambers. POV Alicent Hightower. As I was still thinking about what I might say to Prince Eamon and how I would phrase it, the door suddenly opened. It took me by surprise, as everyone was usually required to knock on my door and ask for permission to enter before opening it. Except for Viserys, who does it more out of courtesy than duty, I thought as I watched the young prince, of impressive stature, enter my chamber as if it were his own. Ser Criston entered right after him, scandalized by the prince's actions, and shouted at him, saying, you cannot barge into the queen's chambers. It's fine, Ser Criston, you can leave us, I said, not wanting to start these negotiations on the wrong foot. You heard your mistress. Lie down and go back to your kennel, said Prince Eamon, throwing a provocative look at my champion, who fell right into the trap the prince had set for him. Ser Criston stepped forward menacingly, his hand on his sword, which surprised Prince Eamon, who smiled at the completely thoughtless act of Ser Criston. Ser Criston, I gave you an order, I said firmly, furious at the embarrassment my sworn shield was causing me. Prince Eamon put a finger near his ear and said, are you deaf? Ser Criston turned away from the prince, bowed to me, and then left, furious. I let out a sigh of relief when I saw that the incident had ended without further escalation, and I turned my attention to the prince, who was standing over Helena's cradle, still asleep despite the noise they had made. "She's beautiful," he remarked thoughtfully. "She was, unfortunately, born a few years too late," I said, looking at the prince. The prince smiled slightly at my unexpected flattery but then said seriously, "Spit it out. Your guard's attitude says a lot about what you seem to know about me." Shocked by the suddenness of his blunt and unadorned words, I remained momentarily speechless until he added, with a sly smile, less than a meter away from me, "What do you think you know that would give you control over my voice and my forces? Ser Criston is truly an idiot." He figured out right away that I had obtained compromising information about him because of that outburst, I thought, completely unsettled by the prince's successive questions. "I've learned that you formed an alliance with the mountain clans, and I can prove it." "Unfortunately for you, you weren't discreet enough this time," I said, trying to regain control of the conversation. "Very well, I understand better now this sudden blind confidence in you. Until today, you seemed quite weak to me, which you still are," the prince said, turning away from me and walking through my chamber, observing the decorations, paintings, and tapestries with a scrutinizing eye. A few seconds passed before he turned his attention back to me and said, "You have nothing but vague support from your birth house and a sworn shield. What makes you think you can blackmail me?" His piercing gaze made me shudder slightly because it wasn't Viserys I was trying to manipulate. "He's Daemon Targaryen's son. He hides it, but I know they're alike, or at least I sense it," I thought before taking a small breath to release the tension in me and refocus on our discussion. "You have an army of over 2,000 knights with your current bannerman. House Royce can certainly raise an army of 10,000 soldiers, and you have a dragon as a bonus." A very large dragon, I thought, pausing for a moment to recall the ever-growing size of his dragon. I resumed my little monologue, adding, "In the event of open war in the Vale, you will certainly win. And as long as your ambitions remain in the Vale, it's possible that the king, no, it's even extremely likely that the king won't seek to intervene, but..." Eamon asked, waiting for me to finish my sentence. "But you will lose his trust, and it's more than likely that your children won't get dragon eggs," I said, suddenly filled with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. "May the Seven make him believe me," I thought, trying to scare him. Chapter 57. POV Alicent Hightower. Prince Aemon nodded, granting me that point, before asking me in a calmer tone, "And what is your offer for such an alliance between us? I've thought about it, and I believe that only a blood-forged alliance is the right way to seal this agreement. What do you think?" I said, trying to gauge him. "Specifically, what are you offering me?" he said, impatient, as I had dodged his question. I took a deep breath, feeling that I had him in my grasp, and said, raising my chin slightly, "The House of Hightower and the House of Royce will combine their forces to destroy the grip that House Veerion has on trade in the Narrow Sea." "Wait, forgive me for interrupting so suddenly, Your Grace," he said, without any apparent respect. "But what makes you think I'd need you if I were to face House Veerion? Why do you even think I'd have to?" I frowned and said to Eamon, "Believe me, Corlys Velarion's pride knows no bounds. With the way you spoke to him during the tournament, he will make you pay for that insult." "I'm his son-in-law and a prince of House Targaryen," said Prince Aemon, underestimating the danger of House Velaryon. "As well as the level of pride that the lord of that house has," I thought, silently pitying the repercussions that would soon fall on him and his house. I brushed aside the topic of an economic war, saving it for later when he would fully understand the threat Corlys Velaryon posed, and continued, saying, "Nevertheless, House Royce has many young women of marriageable age. Given that my elder brother's wife passed away nearly 3 years ago and he has not yet remarried, I'm sure we could unite him with one of your cousins, don't you think?" "Is that all you have to offer?" he said, disappointed by the proposal, and I inwardly rolled my eyes, cursing the impatience he shared with his accursed father. I gathered all the frustration I felt in order not to jeopardize my chances of bringing him to my side before making my final offer. "My eldest, Aegon, already has 7 days of his name. I'm willing to place him at Runestone until his majority, provided he spends half the year in the capital with me." That's better," he said, making my heart leap with hope that he would accept, but he added, narrowing his eyes, "What do you want me to do in exchange?" "Here comes the hard part," I thought. I said, using all the authority I could muster. "I want you to have the king's hand removed from his post, as well as the commander of the city watch, and replace them with my father and my elder brother." I imagined that the prince would laugh at me, mock me, or even call me mad. In short, every negative scenario that my anxious mind could conjure up in that moment. But he did none of that. What I didn't expect, however, was that he would take a few moments to think before saying, "That's doable, but I regret that you can't afford that price." "What price?" I asked, almost incredulous. I was only thinking of my brother, but if there's even a slight chance that my father could return to court, I have to seize it. Your brother is not in the line of succession to Old Town, nor any other fief, and you don't have the authority to marry him off, nor any of your nephews. What you're offering me is empty air. And even if it were true, he's just a glorified knight, like your father. I have nothing to gain from this, said the prince. Then tell me what you want in return, I said, not understanding what he expected from me. A marriage worth my while, he said enigmatically. I frowned, still not understanding his hints. And while imagining what he might be trying to ask of me, I followed his gaze, and that's when I realized what he truly wanted. Helena, I understood, seeing the way he looked at my daughter's cradle. No. I said reflexively, in a categorical tone. He wants to take 2 of my children, I thought. Then we have nothing more to discuss, he said, turning to leave. I'm becoming more and more isolated. Without father and Brynden, I won't make it, I thought, watching the prince, who had already opened the door, ready to leave. I clenched my teeth and cried out, "Wait." POV Aemon Targaryen. As I placed my hand on the door handle leading outside, I heard the sound I had been eagerly waiting for. "Wait. Have you thought it over?" I asked, raising my eyebrows impatiently. "I am willing to let Helena marry one of your cousins, but he must be around your age," she said, as if it were a non-negotiable condition and she was ready to jump out the window. I frowned, confused, then said, "Who do you think I am? She won't marry any of my uncles or cousins. She will be the next Lady of Runestone." The queen's eyes widened, realizing that we had misunderstood each other. At least, she had, I thought, observing the young mother as she calmed down. Then she furrowed her brow before saying, "The Velaryons won't. They have absolutely no say on my lands," I said, cutting off the queen, who didn't seem to mind that, before adding, "This leaves the hands of your 2 sons free to marry ladies from great houses." She must think now that our interests are aligned, I thought, smiling. 3, she said, caressing her swollen belly. "That's all I wish for you," I said, opening the door and stepping out, having concluded a preliminary alliance with Alicent. It's so much easier with Lares. It only took one conversation for her to think she had found a way to pressure me into a trap, I thought as I made my way to my cousin's chambers, smiling. Chapter 58. POV Rhaenyra Targaryen. "I knew it," I said, gritting my teeth. "What exactly do you think you know?" Daemon asked me. "That I shouldn't have trusted him," I shouted, pacing around my room. "You're worrying too much. Aemon gave us his word." "I'm certain he won't betray us," Daemon said, not at all concerned about what Aemon might be plotting with Alicent. "And what is his precious word worth? When I summoned him first, he preferred to join that little whore," I said, increasingly irritated. "The queen." He obeyed an order from the queen, and knowing him, he wasn't accommodating with her, especially given how her champion spoke to him, Daemon said. "What do you know about him? He's barely your son," I said, exasperated that he was taking his side rather than mine. Daemon raised his eyebrows, shocked by my response, and I immediately apologized, realizing I had gone too far. "Sorry, uncle, I didn't mean." "Stop panicking. Sit down and shut up. Running around won't help you in this situation," he said, doing his best to ignore me. Just as I was about to sit down, cursing myself for having spoken too much, someone knocked at the door. Even though I had an idea of who it was, I asked in a detached tone, "Who is it?" "It's your favorite cousin," Aemon said nonchalantly, which immediately reignited the fire in my mind. "Enter," I said in an authoritative tone, leaving no room for hesitation. Aemon walked in calmly, a big smile on his face, which irritated me even more. I immediately asked in a slightly aggressive tone. "What did she offer you to turn against me?" Aemon rolled his eyes, greeted his father, and hurried over to the platters I had initially brought in so we could discuss peacefully over a little snack. Hoping to loosen tongues. This is delicious," he said, biting into a tart or a pie, I couldn't tell. What does it matter? Don't make me repeat myself. Eamon motioned for me to wait as he chewed the pie, signaling to Daemon that the pie was excellent. This little brat is playing with my nerves, I thought, on the verge of shoving the entire tart down his throat. He began to cough and signaled for me to get him a drink, which I did reluctantly. Once he finished drinking, he said, "Your cooks are real killers, Rhaenyra. They nearly got me." "What did she offer you?" I repeated, completely ignoring his words. "Tell her, or her heart might stop right here and now," Daemon said, seemingly amused by the situation. "You two aren't funny at all." "Well, if you must know, she made me a very tempting offer, a seat on the small council, a trade alliance with House Hightower and Lannister, and a blood alliance with, according to her, Aegon II, King of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. POV Aemon Targaryen. How dare she? Rhaenyra screamed, furious, throwing a bowl across the room. Whoa, I can't believe it, 2 sentences and she's already in this state, I thought, shocked at how much my little schemes were affecting her. "What did you say to her?" Rhaenyra demanded, pointing at me aggressively. I told her I would think about it, I said slowly, letting her anger and hatred for Alicent Hightower build, clouding her judgment as much as possible. The angrier she is, the less rational she will be, I thought. "Think about what?" she shouted, stepping towards me menacingly. "What do you have to think about?" "She's stealing my throne, my legitimate inheritance," Rhaenyra yelled. "He wants more than what we promised him," Daemon said. I nodded and said, "Personally, I don't really like that woman. She thinks she's a dragon when she's not. She tries to dictate the rules of our house without any strength, and I find that intolerable. But I have to admit, she made me some tempting offers." "What do you want?" Rhaenyra asked. "If you could slightly increase your offer to match that of your stepmother, then everything will be settled, and you won't have to fear Alicent Hightower anymore," I said, as if she were getting the better deal. "I'm not afraid of her," Rhaenyra replied. "Very well, let's say you won't have to worry about her anymore," I rephrased. "As long as her sons are alive, she will do everything to remove me from my rightful place," Rhaenyra said, which instantly chilled me. "Don't forget, they're your brothers," I said suddenly, serious, frowning because, despite my cold calculations, children are still children. "Name your price," Rhaenyra said, choosing to ignore my last words. "I want Jane Eyre deposed and handed over to House Royce, who will decide her fate." "That's..." "I'm not finished," I said, cutting her off with an authoritative tone that silenced her. I continued, "I want your firstborn son sent under my care from his 6-day name until he reaches his majority, where I will make him a man worthy of succeeding you one day." "You're dreaming," Rhaenyra said, as if it was a condition she wouldn't even consider. "Alicent has already agreed to this condition," I said, forcing her into a corner. "Go to hell," she said, realizing she had no choice if she wanted to keep me on her side. "I will, very soon, with my wife, I promise." "But I'm not done yet," I said, silencing her so she would listen to my final demand. "I also want the taxes on House Royce to be lifted for the first 10 years of your reign," I concluded. 10 years of tax exemption. "Is this a joke?" she said, laughing at my ridiculous request. "It's up to you to decide," I said, spreading my arms. "Accept," Daemon said, clearly not pleased with what I had just done but remaining impassive. "This is robbery," Rhaenyra said, scandalized that Daemon agreed with me. "It's still better than him joining that whore from Old Town, isn't it?" Daemon said, who had a fierce hatred for the Hightowers. "Fine, I grant you everything you want," Rhaenyra said. "Very well, then rest assured, I will be the first defender of your rightful claim to the Iron Throne," I said, dramatically bowing before leaving the room. I had completed the penultimate part of my plan. Just one more piece, and the puzzle will be complete, I thought, eager for everything to finally fall into place. Chapter 59. POV Gunther Royce. Eamon and I were walking through the dark streets of the capital, heading to a brothel. Even though I tried to silence the questions that kept bombarding my mind, I couldn't help but wonder what we were really going to do there. I finally cracked because I knew my nephew well enough not to insult him by assuming he wanted to pay prostitutes for a few minutes of pleasure when he was just about to marry one of the most beautiful young noblewomen in the realm. A Veerion, a dragon rider no less, I thought. What are we really doing so late in a brothel, Eamon? I asked. Even if he needed to blow off some steam, half of the noble ladies would willingly throw themselves into his bed if he gave them the chance, I thought, watching my nephew, who walked with his usually platinum blonde hair now dyed black to hide his identity. All the pieces are in place. I just have one more thing to do to win this game, he said, once again speaking cryptically. Might as well say nothing, I thought, slightly annoyed that he was speaking in riddles again. Everything okay, Gunther? You look a bit nervous, said Eamon with a grin. He loves it when I don't understand what he's up to, even though we spend almost all our time together, I thought, smiling slightly at my nephew's teasing expression. I'm nervous because I've barely slept in a week, and tonight will be even shorter than the last, I replied. Eamon smiled and said, I warned you. You should have alternated with Arnold so you could rest. I snorted and said, if something happened to you, your mother would kill me on the spot. Eamon turned toward me with a grin, spreading his arms, and said, what could possibly happen to me? So many things you don't even realize, I thought, recalling a conversation I had with my cousin Rhea before leaving for the capital. Make sure you're always with him when he travels, watch him like a shadow. He has a dragon, he's an excellent fighter, but there are far too many poisoned arrows shot from the shadows. Nothing must happen to him. I assume we're meeting someone? I asked, trying to make conversation without letting my guard down, keeping a close watch on everything around me. Eamon responded, clearly not wanting to say more. Please tell me you're not going to see that demon, I said, disgusted by the loathsome man. The description Rhea had given me made me decide I could never tolerate that thing. He's not even a man, I thought, remaining silent. No, I'm not going to see him, though I would have liked to, Eamon said, surprising me, as I knew the resentment he harbored toward his father. With him in the mix, I could have had many more opportunities, but unfortunately, I can neither rely on him nor trust him with such things, he added. I should have guessed, this kid's hypocrisy never ceases to amaze me, I thought, smiling inwardly. I take it it's not the princess or your little rat, so who else could you be going to see? I asked, trying to change the subject to keep the mood light. You'll see soon enough. We've arrived anyway, Eamon said, changing the subject as we approached a small but luxurious and very private brothel. Nothing like Daemon's whorehouse. Eamon entered the brothel, and as soon as we arrived, a man approached us directly, bowed, and silently indicated the way to a private suite. Once we reached the suite, the man left without saying a word. I frowned at this suspicious behavior, but seeing Eamon calm, I relaxed slightly, though I kept my hand on the hilt of my sword. A few moments after the man left, the door opened, and Eamon's little rat entered. My prince, he said, bowing as best as he could given his condition. Don't bow to me, your leg is already causing you enough pain, it seems, said my nephew. The clubfootman nodded, silently thanking Eamon for sparing him the duty of bowing, before looking at him to see if he could sit on the chair opposite him. Eamon nodded, gesturing to the chair in front of him, and the clubfoot took the seat, visibly relieved. So? Eamon asked. No response, said Larry Strong. No message, my nephew asked. No, Larry's replied. That's strange, I hope. Just as Eamon began his sentence, someone knocked on the door. Enter, said Eamon, as if he owned the place. Instantly, 3 hooded figures entered, dressed simply. But their gait clearly betrayed their status, I thought, noting that the man in the lead was likely a lord, accompanied by 2 of his guards. You found the place easily? Eamon asked, joking lightly. There was a map, said the man with black hair, whose voice I recognized instantly. Eamon smiled and said, I'm glad and truly touched that you trust me enough to come in person, Uncle Viserys. Chapter 60. POV Viserys Targaryen. I nodded, but without a hint of a smile, because I didn't appreciate the way Eamon had summoned me, as if I were a mere servant. I'm glad to hear it, but that's not why I came, and you know it perfectly well, I said, because in the letter he had sent me, containing all the instructions, the tone was somewhat urgent. I understand. Please take a seat, Uncle, Eamon said, pointing to the 3rd empty chair. I frowned as I observed young Larry Strong, the son of my current hand of the king, but I said nothing for now, as I wanted to hear what Eamon had to tell me that was so important. So, what was so urgent that you threatened my personal servant to burn her in Uryx's fire if she opened the letter? that you prevented me from bringing the commander of my personal guard with me outside the walls of the Red Keep, and that you made me come out dressed in this ridiculous outfit?" I asked, pointing to the clothes Eamon had made my servant deliver to me and the ridiculous dye I had applied to my hair, without really knowing why, but following my nephew's instructions to the letter. Eamon didn't appear ashamed, guilty, embarrassed, or even disappointed by my interrogation and the methods he had used, as he simply replied in a light tone. "I'm sorry for covering this meeting in so much mystery. I already have all the answers to your questions. Let me just explain what's been happening from the start." "I'm waiting for that," I said, slightly annoyed, hoping he had a good excuse for this behavior. Just because I like him and grant him certain liberties doesn't mean he can get away with anything. "I don't know where to start, so I'll just tell things in chronological order, as they happened," he said. I nodded, and he began. "After our conversation this morning, I felt particularly light, as if for once I had been able to talk with someone who truly understood the choices and sacrifices I make daily, while enduring a pressure similar to, or even greater than, mine." I nodded because I had felt the same way. That conversation lifted a weight off my shoulders, I thought, reflecting on the rest of my day. Eamon continued in a darker tone, which worried me slightly. "I decided to go have some fun with a few knights." "Have fun?" From the rumors, he completely humiliated my knights. But two people immediately came to speak to me at the end of my sparring. "Who?" I asked, confused, as I could tell from my nephew's tone that it wasn't good news. "Daemon and Criston Cole," he said, lowering his head. "Why?" I asked, curious to know what could make him so uncomfortable. At the time, I asked myself the same question as you, Uncle Viserys. I didn't understand what they wanted from me. But, I thought, waiting for him to tell me what was going to make me angry. I raised my eyebrows, still not understanding, and Eamon continued his story. "At first, I thought it was just a coincidence and that you and my father both wanted to see me for different reasons. But that's not the case, because I haven't spoken to him since this morning, I realized. But I quickly understood that they were both just messengers. I closed my eyes, finally understanding what had happened. Alicent and Rhaenyra," I sighed, realizing that the two women in my life had struck again. Eamon nodded without saying anything, but I asked, sensing something wasn't right with this story. "I understand why Ser Criston was Alicent's messenger. He was in charge of her guard for the rest of the day, but since when has Daemon been close enough to Rhaenyra to act as her messenger?" Eamon shrugged before nodding toward the twins who were accompanying me and watching over me. "Ser Eric and Ser Eric are witnesses. Both of them came to speak to me this morning in the training yard." I turned to the twins behind me, who nodded, and Eamon said, "There's something else." "What?" I asked, perhaps too aggressively, feeling like this was just the beginning. "I didn't want to tell you because I was afraid of your reaction, but I have to admit it's my fault they got closer. That's why he's getting more and more uncomfortable as he speaks." "What do you mean by, it's your fault?" I asked, narrowing my eyes in anger. "When you asked me how Rhaenyra and I reconciled, I omitted to tell you that I used my father as a mediator, because we had gone too far for either of us to abandon their pride," I said, realizing that Daemon had probably planned everything to trap them later. "He's clever and intelligent, but he's still just a boy. He has so much to learn," I thought, slightly disappointed that I had overestimated my nephew. "Yes," Daemon agreed, "but he set a trap. He used his role as a mediator to take advantage of the situation by placing a condition." "He set a condition? What condition?" I asked, feeling that the worst was yet to come. "We have to." Eamon closed his eyes, unable to continue, which irritated me even more. "You little snake, I gave you everything, and you still have the nerve to trap my daughter in your own blood. What do you have to do for my bastard brother?" I said, my jaw clenched. Eamon took a deep breath before saying, in a tone disgusted by the idea, "We have to force you to accept favorable tax laws that will serve the pride war between the sea snake and my father."